Okay, folks, I just want to say good afternoon. I'm glad you were able to make it. This is the beginning of the political education and community organizing session sponsored by the NAIP, New African Independence Party. What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be focusing on volume 1 of Toward the New African Revolution. If you look in your chat, you can see 2 platforms that would allow you, if you so desire, to purchase the book. You can purchase hard copies, or you can purchase a digital volume from Amazon. You can purchase a hard copy volume through the African American Literature Book Club. If you look in the chat, you'll see links to both services. So we're going to we want to start shortly. And if you can just bear with me, let me do a few technical things here. Just a moment. I'm going to do a screen share, and hopefully you'll be able to see it. Can you all see the screen share now? At the top, it should have Toward the New African Revolution, Volume 1.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the beginning. And we're going to cover 3 chapters today. Chapters 1, 2, and 3. And all right, so here we go. I'm gonna call upon people to read if you so desire. If not, I'll be reading the narrative, and then we're gonna pause from time to time to get some feedback, some critique, and some discussion. So this is Toward the New African Revolution, Volume 1. Subtitle is Reflections on the Struggle for Black Freedom and Self-Determination by Khalid Raheem. This is the foreword, and I'm going to read the foreword, and I'll start now. A few years ago, as part of the ongoing political education initiative of the New African Independence Party, or the NAIP, I developed a pamphlet titled The Philosophy and Platform of the NAIP, or the New African Independence Party. This pamphlet continues to serve as an introduction to and basic explanation of the party's focus and platform. This is actually my first foray into writing any sort of book. In this instance, a collection of my thoughts regarding various aspects of the ongoing struggle for Black liberation and freedom. Our communities face a host of serious challenges today that are indeed very similar to those faced by the generations of the middle to late 20th century. That is white supremacy, racism, mass incarceration, police violence and misconduct, wealth disparity, sexism, and economic inequality. We are also living in a period of serious contradiction among elements of the ruling class elite of the United States and even among some of their main allies abroad. Capitalism is in crisis. Neoliberalism is proving to be unable and unwilling to fulfill its promise. White nationalism and authoritarianism have gained political ground throughout the United States, Europe, and certain parts of Latin America. This edition of Toward a New African Revolution is an attempt to offer some perspective and perhaps some sense of direction for all of those who are impacted by the reality of being Black in America, and those of us who identify ourselves as activists, radicals, revolutionaries, and people of conscience. I want to thank the supporters, brothers, sisters, and comrades of the New African Independence Party for their dedication, inspiration, patience, and hard work in advancing Black freedom and self-determination. To learn more about the NAIP, visit us at www.newafrican.org. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Okay, so we want to move on. And this was published March the 19th, 2019. All power to the people, free the land, and free all political prisoners. So this book has, and the books that I've written are relatively short because I've realized, we have short attention spans in the 21st century. There's a tremendous amount of competition for everyone's attention. Unlike the mid-half or the first half of the 20th century, and probably throughout most of the 20th century, we had radio, then we had television, and television was introduced to the masses of people around the middle of the 20th century. And most of us, we had 3, perhaps 4 channels. Now we live in an era where we can have 400 channels, just television, and all types of streaming and downloading services. So there's a lot of competition for people's attention. And as a result of the type of technology, the mass communications technology that's utilized today, that's at our fingertips for the most part, I think it's important that we customize our messaging as much as possible. And, we want to be competitive, but we don't want to be ridiculous in thinking that we're the only message out there that deserves to be heard. And we may think that, but in reality, it just won't play out that way. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we message our particular ideals and ideas and our positions. The table of contents, again, it's not many chapters, but the table of contents, we start out with definitions shape our perspective. It's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is why an independent Black political party. Chapter 3 is Black Lives Matter, or the BLM is not the Black Liberation Movement, the other BLM. Chapter 4 is around the limitations of Black nationalism, cultural nationalism, and Pan-Africanism. Chapter 5 is theory and practice, continuing the legacy of the Black Panther Party. And chapter 6 is a narrative and a message regarding Black soldiers and Black police, serve the people or defend the empire. Chapter 7 is building a movement for freedom and self-determination. And chapter 8 is comprised of some selected writings of myself, the years 2014 throughout 2017. So we're going to get started. We're going to deal with chapter 1. And chapter 1 is titled Definitions Shape Our Perspective. I'm going to read the first paragraph, and if anyone wants to take the second paragraph or finish the entire page, that will be greatly appreciated. So I may as well start here. I have witnessed and participated in numerous debates, discussions, and arguments that basically boil down to conflicting definitions of words, terminology, and concepts. How we define our situation and circumstance does indeed shape our perspective and, most importantly, influence and determine our response. Anyone else want to take it from there?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
To illustrate, an increasing number of Black folks define themselves and others as conscious and woke. Some are self-described activists and radicals, while others are labeled as revolutionaries. What do these definitions really mean? And how can we such clarity to advance our legal way? For example, who and what is the Black conscious community? How are they defined and what are the requirements for inclusion? Some folks self-identity as members based on their spiritual beliefs, religious or non-religious beliefs, their diet, personal lifestyles. Others define themselves according to what videos they have watched, books they have read, or workshops attended. Another group cites adherence to certain political philosophies such as Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, cultural nationalism, feminism, and variations of socialist ideology. In essence, we have a mixture of Black nationalists, Pan-Africanists, Comedics, New Africans, atheists, socialists, capitalists, entrepreneurs, academics, Democrats, Republicans, independents, Yoruba, Christians, Hebrews, Moors, Muslims, vegans of different types, and folks of various sexual orientation, LGBTQ, who all claim to be members of the Black conscious community.
Let's stop there for one moment. So what do you think about that? What do you think about this opening set of statements about definition, shape our perspective, and keep in mind this was written in 2019. So the Black conscious community and how it defines itself and the membership within the Black conscious community. Any feedback about this so far? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
Yes, there's a bunch of there's a different sector of our society that want that want to fight back, but they they're all from different types of different communities, okay. like you said, the LGBTQ community, like you got religions, you got Christians, you got Hebrews, Moors, like everybody has their own, or in their own particular sect, but they they're all fighting the same what do you call it, perspective, or toward the same goal.
Okay. Brother, you had your hand raised, I do believe.
Thank you for selecting me. Brother Arnold said it all. It touches all bases of our community. We all want this freedom and justice and liberation. So I feel as though, you included everyone. Some might be left out, but they can come on board too for the fight for freedom and liberation. Brother Khalid, I could hardly see it. Can you make the fonts a little bigger, or can you enlarge it on your end? I tried to enlarge it on my end, but okay, it's a little better. Thank you.
Let me see how I can do that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, brother. I can see it right there.
You can see it now? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it much better, and I could help you read.
Okay.
And that's pretty much all what I have to put in right now.
All right. So I may have to reduce the font again, brother. Unfortunately, let me see. No, I should be okay. All right. So I'm gonna read the next section. As such, many serve as self-appointed or in some instances, duly selected representatives of Black thought, culture, and politics. Many unfamiliar with the various tendencies and nuanced differences between these groups would probably conclude that the Black conscious community was an amorphous, unconscious mess. On and off social media, the conscious community spends an inordinate amount of time and energy attacking and critiquing its members. The vast majority of this criticism is not grounded in principled ideological differences or questions of strategy and tactic. Most criticism takes on the character of personality conflicts and cultural wars, similar to those waged among and between elements of the ruling class political parties, the Democrats and Republicans. Many of these cultural wars center on the following issues in no particular order of importance: Black male versus Black female relationships, or Black male and female relationships, religion versus spirituality, ancient Kemet versus Africa, Black LGBTQ people, how to deal with non-Blacks, especially but not exclusively white people, feminism, Black celebrity culture, Black nationalist identity versus class interests, i.e. field Negro versus house Negro. Additionally, these cultural wars and personality conflicts have created a specialized market for various Black cultural lecturers and their supporters. The Fee for Knowledge circuit has expanded their base of supporters. Anyone want to give some commentary regarding this section? What do you think it means? How would you interpret it? Any criticism, any feedback?
It's the struggle from within, brother. We're struggling outside and we're struggling within.
Yeah, that's very true.
We're
And I
fighting.
think that's a great summation. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
And you know, religious spirituality. It's the Willie Lynch divide and conquer mode. It all starts with our education. Even within the family household, there's conflict along all these lines that you're touching base on: male and female relationships, religion, Kemet versus Africa, so on and so forth.
Yeah,
I have to add, my brother.
yeah. And if you look at social media and the use of social media and the explosion of social media, we now have all types of people basically on the mic who have a platform, and much of what they say is taken seriously by other folks. And then we have to admit that some of it is purely entertainment, and some of it is a combination of entertainment plus is educational. But we have a lot of energy that's being put into developing these platforms, and a lot of energy that's being put into listening to and taking to heart much of the information and much of the data that's being pushed forward from these different platforms. And so when we look at the cultural wars that continue to take place amongst the ruling class, for example, the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party, their particular cultural wars around the LGBTQ community, around white nationalism, around freedom of, well, not so much freedom of speech, not a cultural war, certainly, but cultural wars about diversity, equity, and inclusion, who should be included, how it's interpreted, cultural wars around education, and what does education about the founding of the United States of America, for example, what does that really mean? What should be included? What should be excluded? What should be marginalized? What should be emphasized? So we find the same type of cultural wars happening within the Black community as well. Maybe not to the same degree, but certainly we have the cultural wars around Black male and female relationships. We have the cultural wars between those who call ourselves adherence to a particular religious creed versus those who don't adhere to any particular religious creed, who put a lot more focus on being spiritual. We get the cultural wars around the significance of ancient Kemet versus Africa as a whole. And oftentimes people recognize value in both, but then there's the cultural war, there's a discussion about which is the most important, which is the foundation, which emanates from one and what may have produced the other. And then certainly we get to cultural wars within the Black community regarding the role of people from the LGBTQ community in terms of human rights agenda, civil rights agenda, and social justice in general. And then the culture wars around how to deal with non-Black people, non-African people, but especially white people. And even more now, we're having discussions about how do we deal with people from like the Hispanic community, the Latino community, who are not of African descent. And then the cultural wars around feminism. What is the role of feminism? And that is not just a cultural issue. That's a political issue as well. And many of us are caught up into what I define as the Black celebrity culture. So we spend a lot of time going back and forth about our favorite celebrities, whether it's celebrities in the field of mass entertainment or the celebrities in the field of sports and athleticism. And then there's the old, ancient, not that ancient, but relative to the days of slavery, Black nationalist identity versus the class interest, i.e. the field Negro versus the house Negro. And we have to admit that we have a national Black bourgeoisie right now. We have a national Black bourgeoisie. We just don't have a developing embedded Black middle class. Our Black middle class suffered tremendously as a result of some of the financial difficulties within the United States in 2008 and 2009, and even so in more recent years. But we still have a national Black bourgeoisie, which oftentimes is epitomized in the number of Black athletes and entertainers and some politicians. And we have a handful of people who have made their way through manufacturing and through communications and so forth and so on. And they're very powerful in terms of the messaging. And they have become tools of the systems of white supremacy and economic injustice and exploitation. So the last paragraph. Additionally, these cultural wars and personality conflicts have created a specialized market for various Black cultural lecturers and their supporters. The Fee for Knowledge Circuit has expanded their base of supporters. And I call it the Fee for Knowledge Circuit. Because again, many of these people, they have platforms on YouTube and other places, and they solicit donations and they solicit financial support. And even if they don't solicit it, people chime in and they throw their dollars and their nickels and they throw their pennies into the coffers of these particular celebrity cultural workers who participate in these cultural wars. And I have some examples, and these examples might be dated because remember, I wrote this book in 2019. Notable cultural lecturers and personalities such as Umar Johnson, Sarah Sutton Seti, Brother Polite, and others travel around the country doing workshops, lectures, and selling books and videos promoting their particular vision and version of Black consciousness, sometimes even organizing, promoting, and staging debates between themselves. So this is very important that we recognize this, right? It's not to say that these brothers and sisters don't have any value, but their value has continued to be diminished and compromised because it's just become like a marketing capitalist type of thing for many of them, right? So, and I continue, these spectacles have become akin to a traveling Black power minstrel show, replete with groupies and followers. They offer lots of information, symbolism, in theatrics. However, they have provided very little, if any, strategic leadership or inspiration to the Black community. And I know some people may disagree with some of these comments, but let's talk about it. If there's something that you disagree with, I certainly would like to hear it. Somebody else just came in the room, so I just want to repeat this for their sake. So notable cultural lecturers and personalities such as Umar Johnson or Dr. Umar Johnson, Sarah Sutton Seti, Brother Polite, and others travel around the country doing workshops, lectures, and selling books and videos promoting their particular vision and version of Black consciousness, sometimes even organizing, promoting, and staging so-called debates between them. These spectacles have become akin to a traveling Black Power minstrel show, replete with groupies and followers. They offer lots of information, symbolism, and theatrics. However, they have provided very little, if any, strategic leadership or inspiration to the Black community. Brother O, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
We have to be aware that what Marcus Garvey said back in the 1920s and 30s, it's all about propaganda. You got propaganda all sides. You just got to take the propaganda, separate the false from the truth, and utilize it the best way you can for our liberation and our freedom. Remember, propaganda is there. Propaganda from the class, the gatekeepers within your community, and propaganda from the outside community. About keeping us confused. We can't let the confusion sacrifice the liberation struggle. Ashe?
Ashe, I hear you, my brother. I hear you. Very, very good point. Brother Arnold, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, I think a lot of these people are really out for themselves. They I found some of them, give you notable, information to really
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
As far as monetary issues, Black community is way behind white people. As far as as far as catching up to them. As far as money issues. But most of them are really out for themselves. I'll say that for us. They're trying to make money, like you said. They're selling books. They're selling selling their information. They really don't care about the the Black community. Really, most of them, like I said, are out for themselves.
Yeah, I would say this though. I think that some good has come from the work that they've put in, even if the intent was not necessarily to radically change or to revolutionize the situation or conditions within the Black community. If the intent was basically just to promote themselves and to get some financial gain, even if the intent was off kilter, there has been some good that has come from these particular type of cultural lecturers and various personalities. But there's been a lot of damage done as well. And I think the damage done is that it promotes a lot of false narratives about what it really takes to build a revolutionary radical base for transformation and what it takes to really liberate our people. So some good has come from it, but there's been some damage done as well. I'll read the next paragraph. More regrettably, many within our communities continue to view these individuals and their movements as genuinely transformative advocates and vehicles for Black freedom and self-determination. However, at this stage of their development, they are not. And I like to emphasize, at this stage of their development, they are not. because we don't know. Something may happen with Dr. Umar Johnson where he may have this moment of enlightenment where he decides to do the right thing for the right reasons. That if he's going to focus on building a school, that he comes clean with the monies that he's been collecting for over the last decade and a half and makes a serious effort to build an independent Black school. Sarah Sutton Seti, Brother Polite, if they could get off the trail of cultivating followers in a cult personality type of way and really commit themselves to contributing to the genuineness of the Black liberation movement, that could happen with those two brothers as well. So we don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know whether these brothers will continue down the same path for the rest of their lives or until they decide to do something fundamentally different, or they may have a profound change of heart and genuinely join the Black liberation movement, right? So we don't know. Allah knows best. The national New African / Black community is not monolithic, and the conscious community reflects that diversity in many ways. However, many within the conscious community are noticeably apolitical, cultural nationalists, demonstrating a pronounced tendency to avoid both social and political activism. And I know they may rub some people the wrong way, but I think we need to deal with the statement. Apolitical means, like, when someone says that you're apolitical, that means that you're not political. That means that you're not engaged in any type of political struggle or movement. And historically, over the last couple of decades, especially with the rise of movements that were centered and that were fostered and developed around the personalities such as Sarah Sutton Seti, Brother Polite, and Dr. Umar Johnson, those movements, based on those personalities, have been noticeably not political. They don't engage in electoral politics. They don't engage in marches, protests, rallies, demonstrations, petitions. They don't do any of that kind of stuff, right? They put a lot of focus on cultural nationalism. They put a lot of focus on, if you change your culture, then that is going to create the conditions for revolutionary change. Now, is there some value in that? Yes, it is. There's some value in changing your culture. There's some values in changing what you eat, what you drink, being more mindful of what you watch on television, being more mindful of how you raise your children, how you interact with your neighbors, how you interact with your community. Yes, there's a lot of value in understanding the connection between culture and revolution. But to make the assumption that just because you change your culture, that by itself is going to lead to revolutionary change, it doesn't make sense, especially now, like in the 21st century. There were struggles in the 20th century about that particular path. But is culture important? Culture is extremely important. But culture has to be connected to revolutionary thinking, ideology, and activism. So if you, for example, change your name, change your religion, change your diet, raise your children differently, interact with your family differently, that's great for you, right? But where's your revolutionary activism when it comes to your neighbors, when it comes to your neighborhood, when it comes to your community, when it comes to the national Black community, right? Those are the things that we have to look at. And for some people who have been followers and adherents of these particular three brothers, and their sisters too, but these particular three brothers that I highlighted, Brother Polite, Sarah Sutton Seti, and Dr. Umar Johnson, for them, they've been on a path of, oh, I need to change my culture. Great. That is a first step. But that is not the end of your journey, nor should it be. But for some of these brothers, this is what they have promoted almost exclusively. And some of us have fallen into that trap in the past. It happens within the church. It happens within the masjid or mosque, where within the church or the mosque, you're told if you become a good Christian, if you become a good Muslim, that's all you have to do, right? And so you become a good Christian, you go to church every Sunday, you become a good Muslim, you go to mosque every Friday, right? And so that is it for you, right? You're a good human being. Okay, so you have become a better human being But what about your neighbor? What's happening with your neighbor? What's going on within your neighborhood? What's happening with your community? Some of us, we could tell you more about what's happening within our church than we can tell you about who's responsible for the funding or the lack of funding that's coming to our neighborhoods or that's coming to our community. We can give you all the gossip about the masjid and all the gossip about the church, right? But we don't know anything about what's being proposed by the local city council person who represents our neighborhood. So we got to be careful. Culture is very important. You could change your name, you could change your diet, you can become a good Muslim, you can become a good Christian, you can start to wear more dashikis instead of wearing suits and ties. You can put on a gele, or you can put on a head wrap, and all that's great. But what about your politics? Because just because you got a head wrap on, and just because you wear the kufi now, just because you wearing a dashiki instead of the suit and the tie, it doesn't mean that you're revolutionary. It means you may be on the right path, and even that's not guaranteed, because we all know we got people who wear hijab, head wraps, kufis, and dashikis who are now the tools of neocolonialism, right? So beware of that type of thing. I'm gonna read this again, and then two participants raise their hand, and I'm going to acknowledge you, but I just want to reiterate this. The national New African/Black community is not monolithic, and the conscious community reflects that diversity in many ways. However, many within the conscious community are noticeably apolitical cultural nationalists, demonstrating a pronounced tendency to avoid both social and political activism. And two people raised their hands. I'm not sure who was first. Somebody can jump in, because I can't see who's first on your screen. So either one of you.
Free to land. This
Okay,
brother
I'll
got me.
jump in.
Go ahead, brother.
Go ahead, brother. Go ahead, brother Lukman. You go, brother Lukman. I've been talking to talk.
All right,
You
that's
go,
brother
brother.
Jami Lugman. I'm a conscious citizen of the Republic, pro-business government, Republic of New Africa. I am. I seen the link and joined the meeting. I'm actually. Damn, if they don't turn this music off, I might have to go ahead, brother. Let me see if they'll turn this music off. Go ahead and I'll come back.
Okay, well, brother, oh, you go ahead,
Hey,
brother.
thank you,
Lukemon's gonna
brother.
come back. Go ahead.
So, this
I'm
music
a
ain't
I'm a
been on since
staunch
I've been in
believer.
this hospital. And all of a sudden now they won't turn it on.
I'm a
Okay, let
staunch
me
believer in the
go
social,
ahead.
political, social
Go ahead, brother.
behavior. I mean, you have environment, which, along with your culture, dictates your attitude. Your environment can change. It can change from hot to cold, to good to bad, so on and so forth, positive to negative. All human activity is either positive or negative. But when you have a cultural base, a set of values, whether there's Islamic values, revolutionary values, you know the difference between right and wrong, it's going to dictate your behavior. It doesn't necessarily assume to individuals or people. It can be, the equation can be also to businesses, it can be to government, it can be to just about anything. But your culture is your base. It's very, very, how can I say, it's very, very differentialized. And it can come from many aspects. But the main thing is, where is your goals? Is your goals based on truth, or is your goals based on falsehood? And I'll end there. Thanks for your time.
All right, well, thanks, brother. I appreciate your commentary. Next, brother, you
I'm
want to
gonna try
jump in?
again. I'm gonna try again if they don't turn this music back on.
Okay.
I'm in a compromised situation. I had a situation called me to come to the hospital today, but I'll be all right. Anyway, brother Khalid Raheem, thank you for hosting the meeting and calling it. you mentioned two things I want to ask. I want a question about and get clarity on. You said one. You said revolutionary change, activism. Can you expound on those two? How you define those terms, revolutionary activism or revolutionary change? Because I'm seeing a lot of people use this term, and so I want to understand what you mean when you say it.
Okay. Well, I tell you what. If you could hold off a little bit, I'm gonna get into that. I'm gonna get into that as we finish reading chapter 1. So if you could just hold off for just a few more minutes. Is there another question or comment that you wanted to put forward?
No, that's the only one right now.
Okay.
I'm just really trying to pay attention to see what's going on and where everything is at.
Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next paragraph. We're still in chapter 1. In other words, you won't find them engaged in much, if any, mass protests or demonstrations, even around issues such as affordable housing, police misconduct, or racist violence. They would rather talk, text, or lecture about it. The same holds true for political activism in that many will not engage in any form of electoral political struggle, at times being harshly critical of those who do. On the other hand, there are many sisters and brothers within the conscious community who are very dedicated, focused, and disciplined. They continue to put in a tremendous amount of time and energy into actually building real organizations and institutions which promote Black survival, development, and self-determination. You will find them organizing and building Feed the People programs, health and wellness initiatives, gun and rifle clubs, community-based schools, after-school programs, youth development programs, mental health support groups, etc. I often say to people that just because you are conscious and woke doesn't make you an activist. Let me explain. A conscious or woke person is someone who has perhaps become informed regarding the interactions and connections between racism, capitalism, sexism, patriarchy, mass incarceration, health and wellness, etc. Because of this newfound awareness or consciousness, they will initiate a process of self-reflection and introspection, questioning their personal belief systems, values, and lifestyles. A major part of this personal exploration would involve, for example, joining book clubs, conducting individual research and study on various subjects of interest, such as ancient African history, civil rights and Black power movements, feminism, health and nutrition, etc., attending workshops and lectures. The totality of this acute consciousness results in a commitment to change various aspects of an individual's self-perception and lifestyle. They may change their diet, embrace a new set of religious and or spiritual beliefs and practices, change their name, traditional dress, parenting styles, or even career choices. This person or group of people are now conscious or woke. They have started a process that hopefully will consist of continued self-examination, education, critical thinking, and transformation. The conscious or woke person will probably share their awareness and corresponding lifestyle with immediate family and friends, particularly those within their household. However, they are not ready to take their newfound awareness or message to the general community or the people. That's the role of an activist, to kind of respond to my brother's questions. Activists represent various political persuasions and causes. They can be radical, conservative, liberal, revolutionary. They could be political, environmental, criminal justice, feminist, housing, or labor. Activists take their newfound awareness and consciousness to the people in order to educate and inspire others for the purpose of making changes within a neighborhood, community, organization, and or system. it's not just enough for them to know about injustice or oppression. New African or Black activists organize their families, friends, neighbors, and others to actually do something about injustice, oppression, and exploitation. They engage in petition signing campaigns, protests, rallies, and demonstrations, sit-ins, door-to-door outreach, telephone banking, email, and Twitter blasts, etc. They also engage in developing programs, projects, and institutions to provide immediate and long-term relief, particularly around areas such as food, clothing, shelter, education, safety, and security. New African or Black activists are conscious, woke, passionate, and busy. So we talked about activists. Don't forget, activists can come from various political persuasions. I think some of us have a misconception and misunderstanding that only so-called social justice or radical or revolutionary people are activists. That is completely false. There's all types of activists with various types of political persuasions. And I'm going to go over just a few, especially amongst the more conservative activists and right-wing activists who are now running the country. They're running the government. They hold sway within the judiciary, within the House of Representatives in the U.S. Senate, and we all know they hold power, they hold sway within the executive branch of government as well.
Man,
So let's talk about conservatives.
Pretty Land.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on, Pretty Land, brother. My question really mainly dealing with the revolutionary aspect of the term. So what do you mean when you use the word, what is your definition of revolutionary?
Revolutionary, okay, I'll just be brief. Revolutionary is someone who's focused on a complete overhaul of the system, right? So that's the difference between a reformist and a revolutionary, even though the majority of revolutionaries do have some type of reformist programs that advance the cause of revolution, but the ultimate goal is a complete overhaul and transformation of the system. That's it.
In the context of Black folks in America, what are we looking at or what are we talking about?
Well, it depends on what Black folks you're talking to. So, again, as I started out in this particular section by noting that the national Black community itself is not monolithic. So we have various tendencies within the Black community in terms of political tendencies. And we talked about some of those political tendencies earlier. But for those who advocate transformation and change or revolution, then, it's kind of narrowed down to like a handful of mainly the political tendencies, right? We could talk about traditional Black nationalism. We could talk about revolutionary Black nationalism. We could talk about Black nationalism that has a territorial type of imperative, such as that from the RNA, Republic of New Africa. We could talk about bourgeois Black nationalism that became very popular during the heyday of the Nation of Islam. We could talk about more socialist tendencies that would not necessarily put a focus on Black people as a nation, but would put a focus on Black people as part of the US working class. We could talk about radical feminism. We could talk about Pan-Africanism. So we could talk about all the different political tendencies that you find within the Black community. So, I hope that can answer your question.
Right. So
Yeah.
my question is, don't you think that the term is becoming bloated and to the point to where it's basically useless?
I don't think it's useless. I think
everybody and their
people
mama
have,
now is using it and saying that they're revolutionary, including these brothers, the three brothers you just mentioned. They might have revolutionary.
right. So what it means is that we have to give more clarity to the term, and we give more clarity to the term not just based on what we say, but most importantly based on what we do. Like how we live out the politics of being a revolutionary. So, for example, you're part of the RNA, right? So, people may say, well, what are your politics? Well, people can see how you live and how you practice and how you articulate what it is to be a member, a conscious citizen of the Republic of Africa. how you move, the things you support, the things you don't support. That defines who you really are politically. You know, it's not just about what you say you are, it's about how you live. Does what you say coincide with what you do? I hope that can answer your question, or at least answer
Well, you
your
answered
question partially, right?
my question, so thank you. Huh?
So let's get into the different types of activists and the politics that comes with it. So conservatives are basically people who want things to remain the same. They're in favor of the status quo. They want beliefs, values, institutions, structures, systems, and power relationships to remain the way they are or have always been. So when you hear people say, "Well, I'm a conservative," this is what it means. But there's different types of conservatives, and we're going to get into that too. However, our conservatives are not alike. For example, there are social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, as well as political conservatives. So social conservatives would probably be opposed to supporting gay rights, abortion, same-sex marriage, or even basic civil rights for members of the LGBTQ communities. Some social conservatives would also be more likely to oppose any protests during the national anthem or perceived disrespect to the US flag. Now, social conservatism, you will find it even within the Black liberation movement. You will find it even within radical political formations and movements, right? People have different elements and different degrees of social conservatism. As far as social conservatives are concerned, and now I'm talking about basically the Christian nationalist segment of social conservatives or the Zionist element of social conservatives, right? I'm talking about that particular group right now, okay? And I'm talking about some Black folks who belong to those groups as well. Believe it or not, you have some Black folks who may not recognize themselves as such, but they're white nationalists, right? They're white Christian nationalists because they have fallen into the trap of equating their Christian belief system with white supremacy. And some of them don't even recognize that, but they have fallen into that trap. And then you have some Black folks who are Zionists, and I know they may come as a shock and come as a surprise to many of us on this call. But we have some Black folks who, based upon their Christian orientation, believe that, based on their understanding of the Bible in the Scripture, that the Israel mentioned in the Bible is the same Israel that exists today. And so we have to educate those brothers and sisters to come to the realization that the Israel mentioned in the Bible was a biblical Israel, and the nation state of Israel that exists in 2025 is a Zionist white supremacist state, right? They're not the same. And so, they should not give their spiritual, religious, or political support to that entity. But we do have some Black Zionists walking around here. And I know that surprises a lot of people, but it is the truth. So we're talking about the social conservatives that will fall under white nationalism, white Zionism, or Zionism, period. As far as social conservatives are concerned, the United States is a Christian nation and should be led by mostly white Christian men and perhaps a few white women. Social conservatives will, on occasion, quote the US Constitution or their state constitution as a basis for their authority, but utilize the implied moral authority of the Bible in religious writings frequently. So social conservatives, various stripes. Now let's talk about the fiscal conservatives. Fiscal conservatives are focused on economic and fiscal issues, basically how resources are utilized to make money. And that's what an economy is. People struggle with trying to define an economy, right? We talk about the Black economy. We don't really have too much of an independent Black economy. As a matter of fact, we don't have anything that you could call an independent Black economy. We have a Black economic system that flows within the dominant system of white capitalism here within the United States, but that's a whole different discussion. We talk about an economy. An economy is how your resources are utilized to make money. And how the money is managed is your fiscal policy. So let's go back. So we talk about the fiscal conservatives. So for some of you who are old enough to remember the origins, perhaps, of what we call the MAGA movement today, it didn't start with Donald Trump. It started with the rebellion of elements within the Republican Party, two different elements. One element, they were basically the social conservatives, right? What was called then the religious right, right? Some of you may remember this name, Jerry Falwell, minister, pastor Jerry Falwell, right? Against abortion, no gay rights, no same-sex marriage, blah, 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 blah. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that may not be reflective of your social justice politics. But for these guys, this is where they were coming from. So you had the social conservatives who were part of like the religious right, right? And you had the fiscal conservatives, probably best epitomized by the guy who used to be the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And so the fiscal conservatives were always saying, hey, got to have a balanced budget. The United States is spending more money than it's taking in. The United States is spending money on this war, that war, spending money on welfare recipients, spending money on public education, spending money on this, spending money on that. We got to balance the budget. So you get the religious right, you get the fiscal conservatives. That is the nucleus of what we now call the MAGA movement, because the fiscal conservatives kept pushing this agenda about we got to have a balanced budget. The social conservatives kept pushing this agenda. We got to push back against what's happening with gay rights, what's happening with civil rights, what's happening with education in public schools, blah, 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 blah. These forces gradually came together. These forces were smart enough and they were strategic enough to understand how to use their political power. And so they started to run people for local offices. They didn't start out running people for big time offices, even though they had a few people in Congress. They started to run people for local offices. They ran for school boards so they could have more input in terms of the curriculum and in terms of the spending within their local school districts. They ran people for local city councils, for county councils, where those formations did exist. They ran people for state rep, state senator, and eventually they ran people to occupy the governor's office. That's why today the majority of governor's offices around the country are dominated by the Republican Party. And eventually they were able to get more people in Congress, and now they have people sitting on the Supreme Court, and they have people in the White House. So this is the beginning of the MAGA movement. It was a push for social conservatism and for fiscal conservatism. It came out of the religious right movement and out of the balanced budget movement. Both probably better represented. Those who want to do some research, look for Jerry Falwell and then look for Newt Gingrich. That was the beginning of the MAGA movement. All right, so let me step back again. So fiscal conservatives are focused on economic and fiscal issues, basically how resources are utilized to make money, that's an economy, and how the money is spent or managed, that's fiscal. Many state governments today are passing various forms of legislation legalizing the growth, distribution, and retail sale of marijuana for recreational use in order to increase state revenue. If they were legally permitted to produce, regulate, and tax crack, they would. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. If they could get away with it, they would, right? Capitalism knows no bounds. There's no moral boundary there. We should know that as students of history. Remember, there was the period of prohibition where it was a crime to sell and to distribute liquor, right? And people who did so were criminals, and they were put in prison or ran out the country and pushed underground, so forth and so on. Now, the states all around the country, right? In any state, you can basically purchase alcohol. Why? Because it's regulated by the state governments or county governments, and they get their cut off the top, right? And so in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, and I know this is not common throughout the country, because as I traveled throughout the country, when I would mention the state store, most people didn't have a clue as to what I was talking about. But here within the state of Pennsylvania, The place where you buy your alcohol is literally called the state store. Why? Because the state controls the sale and distribution of all alcoholic beverages. They get their money off the top. And slowly but surely, states all around this country will control the sale and distribution of marijuana as long as they get their money off the top. They generally support big business, fewer restrictions on multinational corporations, and lower taxes for the super rich and wealthy, but also cutbacks to social services and entitlements such as welfare, food stamps, Social Security, and Medicare. We all saw what just happened with Trump's so-called big beautiful bill, or whatever he calls it, and it's providing more tax cuts for the rich and wealthy while cutting back again on what? Welfare, food stamps, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, for the poor, for the working class, and people who really need it. They emphasize the importance of balancing the budget, such as tax revenue should equal expenditures, but are usually okay with spending lots of government money on the military and the police. They generally balance the state and federal budgets off the backs of the working class poor, as opposed to increasing taxes on the super rich and wealthy. So now let's get into the political and legal conservatives. The political and legal conservatives focus on the interpretation and application of the United States Constitution, especially when it comes to the First and Second Amendments. First Amendment is, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, so forth and so on. Second Amendment is your right to bear arms. Freedoms of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, the right to bear arms, states' rights are the main areas of engagement. States' rights should sound very familiar to us as Black people, folks of African descent, because it was the call to defend states' rights that was made by the Southern states that succeeded and created the Confederate States of America, which, was the main force opposing the Union during the Civil War. It was the call of states' rights. It was the rallying call of states' rights that was being echoed by Southern states in the 50s and 60s that were like opposed to any progressive civil rights bills and legislation. So states' rights has been the thing for a lot of the political and legal conservatives, especially those who consider themselves to be the bulwarks or to be the defenders of white supremacy or white Christian nationalism, which, to break it down, means they're right to keep you enslaved or keep us enslaved. And they're the ones who, the folks you hear asking, what would the founding fathers do? That's what they fall on all the time. Well, what would the founding fathers do? And so this is what I've written about that. They don't seem to consider that when the United States Constitution was ratified in 1789, Native peoples were being murdered for their land, Africans were being enslaved for our labor, and only white men who owned property could vote. So think about how hypocritical this whole founding father, founding mother group was. They were talking about, they were fighting a revolution to free themselves from English tyranny and to free themselves from British colonial rule. So think about how crazy this is. You got a colony of England or Great Britain that's claiming its independence. It wants to be free from so-called British tyranny, while at the same time, it wants to continue to commit genocide against the indigenous people, right, and steal their land, and also continue to enslave the African people and have them work for free. Full of contradictions, full of stuff that doesn't make sense. Why? And that's one of the reasons that United States then and now continues to work so hard to marginalize or to completely erase, if it can, that type of history, right, from being taught in schools. So again, they don't seem to consider that when the US Constitution was ratified in 1789, Native peoples were being murdered for their land, Africans were being enslaved for our labor, and only white men who owned property could vote. 4 of the first 5 US presidents were all slave masters from the Virginia aristocracy. That had been George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Political and legal conservative or constitutional purists just can't seem to accept the reality that the founding fathers could not have anticipated that the United States would develop into a 21st century multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious corporate capitalist empire. Of course, there are conservatives who fit one or more of the above descriptions. Traditional politics has been known to make very strange bedfellows. For example, different alliances and coalitions. For example, the coalition that makes up the MAGA movement right now is in some trouble. The coalition that makes up the Democratic Party has been in a lot of trouble, right? But let's look at the MAGA movement coalition, the people that I just spoke of earlier. You have within the MAGA movement, you have the Christian nationalists, you have the fiscal conservatives, you have the political conservatives, you have the social conservatives. And so this is the MAGA movement. You know, people would balance the budget, people who say we got to balance the budget, we have to withdraw from engaging in endless wars. I know that sounds familiar. It sounds like only something that the left or the black left or the anti-war people say, but you have factions within the MAGA movement who are anti-war too, right? And they've been saying we need to stop having the United States involved in all these endless wars. They may not understand the dynamics of imperialism the way that we do, but nevertheless, they don't want to continue to see their sons and daughters possibly be slaughtered and murdered in lands abroad. They don't want to continue to see the United States continue to deploy its military resources and its economic resources to defend nation states like Israel, right? So within the MAGA movement, you have that element. If you think about Trump's campaign, a main part of his campaign platform was that he would not continue to engage the United States in these conflicts abroad. Lo and behold, he's been in office just a few months, you know, fighting again to defend the nation state of Israel, fighting again proxy wars with Russia by continuing to supply Ukraine, right? A proxy war. A proxy is just, you use one thing or one group to do something indirectly that you yourself at this point may not want to do. So we have various proxy wars going on all around the world, right? So United States is really at war with Russia, but Ukraine is the proxy. And I hope you understand that. United States is actually at war with Russia, right? But Ukraine is the proxy, okay? United States is actually at war with Iran, but Israel is the proxy. Okay, now Israel is not just a proxy for U.S. interests throughout the Middle East and throughout Western Asia, but Israel has its own agenda, what they like to call a greater Israel. And a greater Israel would look like what we now see as the nation state of Israel, with Israel also having hegemony over a lot of other areas in the region, such as Syria, such as Iraq. They would want to include Iran in that, but I don't think that's going to happen. But definitely Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, so that would be the greater Israel. And, that's kind of what they want to achieve. Israel will become the dominant power in that section of the Middle East, right? And so United States has its own interests. Israel has its own interests. And in some situations, they coincide with one another, but in other situations, they conflict. Israel has like intelligence forces here with the United States. There have been cases where American citizens have been charged with espionage because it's been discovered that they've been spies for the nation state of Israel, which, by the way, should not be surprising when you recognize that a lot of Jewish people here within this country have dual citizenship. They are citizens of the United States of America and the nation state of Israel. Many soldiers of Jewish descent serve in the U.S. military, and then after they finish serving the U.S. military, they go on to serve in the military of Israel, right? The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. So that is, just a quick and fast overview of some of the stuff that we're dealing with now. So although most conservatives in the United States are white people, conservatism as an ideology is not restricted by race. There are indeed Black conservatives fitting the above descriptions. You will also find conservatism within both mainstream parties, Democrats and Republicans. However, there is a more pronounced tendency within the Republican Party. Conservatism is also found within the Black conscious community too. Some woke or conscious folks are socially conservative, but radical in their critique of white supremacy in the political economy of the United States. For them, only specific types of Black people are qualified to contribute, participate in, or benefit from the movement for Black or New African freedom. All too often, those qualifications have more to do with gender, sexual orientation, and or religion as opposed to courage, commitment, and skill sets. So keep that in mind. We have conservatism even within our movement, right? We have some brothers and sisters who don't want to work with people from the LGBTQ community. Why? Not because they don't have the skills or they're not qualified, but just because of their orientation and their preference, right? We have some people within our movement who don't necessarily want to take leadership from people who are Muslim. Why? Not because the Muslims are less qualified or don't have the courage or the skill set. Well, we just don't want to take leadership from them because they're Muslim. And the same thing with Muslim. We got certain Muslim brothers and sisters within our movement who don't want to take leadership from people who are Christians, not because they're less qualified, don't have the courage or the skill, but just because they're Christian. So we have those type of dynamics within our liberation movement that we have to deal with. We got brothers today who don't want to take orders to take leadership from women just because they women. They think, well, I'm a man. I ain't got to listen to her, right? Well, I mean, didn't you listen to your mom? Don't you still listen to your grandmother? I mean, so it's like we have all these contradictions and conflicts within our movement as well that we need to flesh out, we need to talk about, that we need to combat and push back against. Let's talk about liberals, and maybe this also goes back to my brother's original question. So liberals don't want revolution. Liberals tend to favor gradual, incremental reforms or changes to an existing social order and system. Liberalism as a political philosophy favors increased and gradual liberties and civil rights, but not a fundamental shift in the relationships of power and control of resources. Hence, here within the United States, we find liberals and progressives who will support cause to end police brutality, provide affordable housing, and defend the Voting Rights Act, but they won't support reparations or self-determination for Black people. They will claim that such policies are divisive or that the time is not yet right. In terms of Black freedom, liberalism fosters dependency, not liberation. Let me say that again. In terms of Black freedom, liberalism fosters dependency and not liberation. I'll stop there. I'd like to hear some feedback and comments before we continue. And I'll look at the chat and see if somebody put something in the chat. Okay. Okay, Lisa, I will continue
I'm gonna have to get the book.
Speak as much as I can. I see you can't read it.
I'm gonna have to tell the sister at the new Few of a Kind bookstore, Sister Sarah Jamela, to get some of your books in, because I'm gonna tell people in my circle to definitely get the book, because it opens up a whole new realm of activism in politics for me. I consider myself apolitical. I didn't want to get involved in your politics, but to come to find out from your analysis, apolitical deals also with revolutionary politics and Black national politics. I can't call myself apolitical and not be a part of the revitalization and the recreation of the system, or the downfall of this system, of the Babylonian system. So I commend you on that, brother. I can't wait to further on it. Keep up the good work. I'll continue to try to participate as much as I can and try to bring others to the PE sessions as best as I can. May Allah continue to bless you, my brother, and keep you well. And may we keep you well and support you and continue to support you in all that you do.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate your comments, and I've always appreciated your support and your participation in activism. And no, brother, you're not apolitical because you're here with us. Like an apolitical person would not be here. An apolitical person would not support or join the New African Independence Party. An apolitical person would not even consider electoral political struggle as an option to advance Black liberation. So if you were apolitical, you're no longer apolitical. You are a politicized person. So thank you for your participation. Brother Arnold, you have some comments?
Yes, I think a lot of people nowadays, especially a lot of famous people, they want to be simulated within this country. They don't really want to. They can bring up stuff, and try to protest and stuff, but they still want to be assimilated.
Very, very true. And we're going to get into that right now. Most liberals in the United States are members of the Democratic Party, although you will find them among third or independent political parties as well. Black liberal politicians tend to abhor and dislike genuine radical Black nationalism, except when it serves their interests to appear militant. Some will make a public display of their loyalty to the Black community by engaging in safe activities such as controlled marches, demonstrations, holiday celebrations, and back-to-school activities. These types of activities give the community the impression that this particular politician is okay and really looking out for the interests of the people, when in essence, these activities are staged to keep the Black votes coming in for the next election cycle. I don't remember, let me say this, I don't remember what the occasion was. It might have been a reaction to a police killing that went viral. So it might have been a reaction to the murder of Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin. It might have been a reaction to the status of, I can't remember the name of the bill. Somebody help me. There was a bill that had been proposed, I think, during Biden's administration to deal with police brutality. But anyway.
George Floyd bill.
The George Floyd bill. Thank you very much, Brother Arnold. But if I remember correctly, it was one of those type of scenarios where members of Congress, notably members of the Congressional Black Caucus, they all were wearing kente cloth, and then they took a knee. And people took pictures of it and videos, and this was supposed to represent some real, monumental move. It was just all theatrics. It didn't mean anything, right? It didn't mean anything. It wasn't a strong move. It was just a whole bunch of theatrics, right? And those type of theatrical presentations are meant to keep our people asleep or keep our people misdirected, keep our people tied to the apron strings of the Democratic Party. Because you say, yeah, man, my congressperson, you saw that they was wearing their African garb and they took a knee of protest. Yeah, but how did they vote, man? You see what I'm saying? What kind of bill did they present? Did they really push for a certain bill to be signed, to be passed? What kind of work have they been putting in on a grassroots basis? Do they come to your neighborhood? Have you seen them since the last election? Right. So we have to become more sophisticated in our political analysis of the people who represent us and how we should interact with them, right? Whether we voted for them or not. If we live in their district, we need to hold them accountable as much as we can. And holding them accountable doesn't mean like voting or not voting for them. And that's why we started an independent Black political party, a radical independent Black political party. Because holding these guys accountable also should mean that we select candidates from amongst ourselves to run against them in the next election cycle. Like if they're not doing or saying what they need to do to help our people, to advance Black liberation, we got to replace them. We can't keep talking about like, well, we're going to hold them accountable by like our votes. No, hold them accountable by replacing them. They need a new job somewhere else, right? Because obviously they're not serving our people. So the vast majority of Black liberal politicians do not truly fight for the interests of its Black working class and poor constituency either. They are out at, let me see, I can't see this part, but almost every opportunity, they sell out proudly. Nowadays, that sellout usually involves taking money and campaign contributions from major corporations and Wall Street operatives via political action committees. Local political campaigns derive support from their local party establishment and the business community. If the area is being targeted for gentrification, real estate developers will also throw some money around. Please don't overlook that. Many of us, we still live in urban areas, urban communities. Many of our urban areas or urban communities have been ripe pickings for gentrification. So we have public officials who are supposedly our representatives. Look at where they get their money from, right? We had a situation up here in Pittsburgh as there was a mayoral, and there's still a mayoral race going on, but the primaries are over now. So during the primaries, it came out that both the incumbent mayor as well as one or two of the people who were challenging him for the Democratic Party's nomination and for the spot, they all were getting money from like the real estate developers. Everybody, they all. I mean, if not everybody, I think out of the four candidates, two of them or three were getting money from the real estate development people, right? Same people that will send flyers to your house, emails to you, call your mother, grandmother, grandparents, or great grandparents, trying to persuade them to sell that house that your family, struggled to purchase, to sell that land, sell that property. So we got to be more smart in how we deal with local politicians and who we vote for. And again, it's not just voting for someone, it's about running for office. And I think that is where we should be focused. Take a look at the various cities and areas across the United States that are still home to relatively large but declining Black populations. For example, Detroit, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. The vast majority have been controlled and managed by the Democratic Party establishment and its liberal wing for decades. In spite of the heroic sacrifices of the civil rights movement and the passage of landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And I'm gonna say something about the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 literally was passed on the blood of Dr. Martin Luther King, literally. Fair Housing Act was passed. See, Dr. King was assassinated April the 4th of 1968. They put that bill in, they got that joint through, they passed it in a few weeks after Dr. King was murdered. And they did it for a reason, because America was on fire. A lot of you may not, I mean, I was part of it, but a lot of you may not know this, but America was literally on fire. They were, like when Dr. King got murdered, there were over 100 different riots, so-called riots and rebellions in different cities. Well, there were over 100 cities. There were more than 100 rebellions because cities had multiple hotspots. But there were over 100 cities that went up in flames, man. Over 100 cities. Black folks was mad, especially the young Black people. We were pissed off, right? And it was bad. It was so bad that they called the National Guard in a lot of cities around the country, but they called out the military in Washington, D.C. to protect the White House because they thought that Black folks were going to overrun the White House, slit Johnson's throat, right? For real, for real. But I oftentimes tell people that, the white folks my age and older who are still around, they won't say it out loud, but they know they dodged the bullet. They literally dodged the bullet. That was during my lifetime. That was the one time when Black America was really on the cusp of just all out war, straight up all out war. And I need to remind people of this other thing. the Black Panther Party was created almost in a direct response to the murder of Malcolm. So Malcolm was killed in 1965. The Black Panther Party was started in 1966. In 1968, on April the 4th, 1968, when Dr. King was killed, the Black Panther Party was mostly a regional organization. It wasn't even a regional, it was mostly a California organization. And the first chapter outside of California, if I'm not mistaken, was up in Seattle, Washington. After Dr. King was killed, the Black Panther Party grew exponentially, unbelievably. It was so bad that the Central Committee was sending people to different cities to try to teach the young brothers and sisters that to become a Panther didn't mean you just went out and started killing white people. That's where people were at that point. It was really, really nasty. So think about that. The Panthers started as a response to the murder of the murder of Malcolm X, and the Panthers grew as a response to the murder of Dr. King. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, which I talked about, passed literally, weeks after the murder of Dr. King, and as a response to what was happening all across this country. Dr. King, before he was murdered, if you remember, he had talked about the Poor People's Campaign, having a Poor People's March. He also had taken residents in a housing community up in Chicago because he wanted to demonstrate how important it was to expand civil rights, not just to fighting back against Jim Crow in the South, but fighting against the segregation and fighting against the Jim Crow in the North, as far as public schools, education, and most notably housing. So after he was murdered, again, that Fair Housing Act was passed, literally dripping with Dr. King's blood. So the Fair Housing Act, 1968, and thousands of Black elected and appointed public officials, working class and poor Blacks in the United States are constantly struggling to survive. So in spite of all the gains that were made, civil rights bills, civil rights legislation, in spite of all the newly elected Black public officials, here we are today in 2025, we're fighting for our life all over again. White liberal and so-called progressive groups and organizations are no better. Again, supporting incremental, a little at a time change, but nothing that is going to fundamentally change the balances of power for Black people or rock the boat on behalf, especially of the working class and poor. And so I'm going to be ending soon. We're probably not going to get to chapters 2 and 3, but I want to say a few more things about this first chapter. So neoliberalism is another version of liberalism. It supports and empowers the status quo and is firmly opposed to new African or Black freedom and self-determination. Like traditional liberalism, neoliberalism fosters containment and dependency. What I present is a definition based on some fundamental characteristics, because sometimes, people have some differences about how they would define neoliberalism, much in the same way people differ on how they may define something like fascism. But I'm going to talk about some of the tendencies and characteristics of neoliberalism. Neo, we know, means new, right? So it's a new type of liberalism, just like you have people who call themselves neocons or neoconservatives. It's a new type of conservatism. It's still conservatism, but it's a new type of conservatism. For example, the warmonger amongst the conservatives are often referred to as neocons, neoconservatives, the ones who believe that, we got to maintain fiscal conservatism, but we need to be able to engage in some wars from time to time. So the neocons, they like world domination. They like engaging in wars in order to advance mostly white Christian nationalism and to maintain U.S. hegemony all around the world, or at least dominance in certain parts of the world. So that's where you get the neocons or the neoconservatives, right? So let's talk about neoliberalism at home. It manifests itself as a system which remains firmly committed to capitalism and the economic exploitation of all workers, especially those of color. It tolerates the existence of the safety net programs of FDR, that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, and LBJ's Great Society, Lyndon Baines Johnson, two presidents, FDR, president during the Great Depression, LBJ, the guy who succeeded John F. Kennedy when he was assassinated, which, by the way, quickly, if you talk with a lot of European scholars, I'm saying if you go and you talk with people from Europe, and you ask them about the assassination of President Kennedy, they often refer to President Kennedy as the president of the United States who was assassinated by his own damn government. But here within the United States, historians here, they gloss over that and they, talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was a lone assassin, and the single bullet theory, one bullet that hit 3 or 4 or 5 people, and a whole bunch of crazy stuff. But when you talk to other people from across the Atlantic Ocean, they just look at the evidence and say, oh, yeah, he was assassinated by forces within his own government. So that's a whole different discussion. LBJ was the vice president. Kennedy got killed November 22nd, 1963, which, by the way, the comments that Malcolm X made about Kennedy's assassination supposedly is what drove him out of the Nation of Islam in 1964. But after Kennedy was murdered, LBJ succeeded him. He took the oath of office, and later on, he was reelected on his own volition, and he became the next president. And he had a series of civil rights bills and civil rights legislation and some other legislation that became known as the premise for his Great Society, right? But advocates aggressively for their privatization, government services ran by private businesses. For example, schools, prisons, trash, garbage collection, so forth and so on. So while the neoliberals, they support the safety net programs of the New Deal and the Great Society, Social Security benefits, so forth and so on. But they advocate strongly for the privatization of different government services, right? So I don't know what city or county you may come from, but look at what's happening within your city. Look at what's happening within your county. Are your trash collection services still run by your local government, or have they been contracted out to a private entity? Are your prisons ran by your county or by your city? Your city jail, is it ran by your city? Your county prison, is it ran by your county, or has it been contracted out to a private entity? And you see it happen on the federal level too. For example, a lot of federal prisons, or I should say an increasing number of federal prisons across this country, the management and administration of those prisons is no longer done by the federal government directly. It has been contracted out to a private entity. So this is what neoliberalism does. It also raises the profile of co-opted labor union bureaucrats while suppressing the voice and influence of rank and file members. So neoliberalism would say, oh yeah, we support unions, but they will do everything in their power to suppress any serious union organizing, to dissuade unions from having strikes, and they will almost handpick different union representatives. And if they don't handpick them, once they get in office, then they will co-opt them, they will corrupt them to make sure they side with management and not necessarily side with the rank and file of their unions. Through globalization and automation, many people have lost jobs, union membership has plummeted, and more workers are being forced to accept unfavorable terms and conditions for continued employment. Most recently, for example, here within the state of Pennsylvania, we had a major strike involving some municipal workers in Philadelphia, basically the garbage collection, trash collection folks. And it was a pretty powerful strike, but they had to compromise. Right? And I didn't watch the entire interview, but I watched part of the interview they did with their union leadership. A Black man, he seemed to be real down to earth, and he spoke to the fact that he was not pleased with the settlement. I think the settlement has to be okayed by the rank and file. I'm not sure whether it's been voted on or not, but he made it clear that he wasn't pleased with the settlement because there were some things that they still did not get. So that's what neoliberalism looks like. That's part of its characteristic. Neoliberalism is an outgrowth of the Democratic Party's successful effort to become more like the Republican Party regarding key aspects of the United States fiscal and social policy. For some of you who can remember this, neoliberal politicians like Bill Clinton gave us the crime bill of 1994, official name, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, as well as the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. Hillary Clinton coined the infamous phrase super predator when describing both the youthful perpetrators and youthful victims of urban violence during the 90s. I remember that very well because I was doing a lot of community organizing and activism around the urban peace and justice movement. Neoliberalism enjoys a tremendous amount of support from Wall Street banks and financiers because they want to count on politicians making it as easy as possible for them, the banks, to finance and investment companies to make tons of money with as little regulation or opposition as possible. So if you look at neoliberalism, when it comes to Wall Street, they operate the same way as the conservatives, right? They all are trying to position themselves. We're talking about the politicians. Number one, they all get a tremendous amount of campaign financing from the Wall Street boys and girls, and they always want to put themselves in a pretty favorable position with Wall Street, right? Whether they're Republican or Democrat, it don't make no difference. And I'm gonna read this part here. More telling, even now, keep in mind, I wrote this book in 2019. So I'm speaking of even now is the year 2019. More telling, even now in 2019, as various candidates for the 2020 presidential race are making public announcements of their candidacy, several Democratic Party candidates such as Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren have already been scheduled for vetting by the wealthy elite of Wall Street. They are placing and hedging their bets, i.e. campaign contributions, as to which candidates can best serve their interests, just like the Clintons and Obama also ascribes to neoliberalism. And capitalism today is a worldwide phenomenon, always seeking new markets, cheap or relatively inexpensive labor, and the development or exploitation of new technologies is what most folks refer to as globalization. Nation states, corporations, businesses, and wealthy individuals are all competing for some degree of power, either regionally and or globally. Businesses are not necessarily loyal to the nation state of their origin. Think about that. Businesses are not necessarily loyal to the nation state of their origin. So to break that down, so you figure like a corporation that was founded and started and that developed and grew within the United States would be loyal to the United States government. No, not really. Think about what happened in the period that we refer to as deindustrialization, when a lot of the businesses said, oh, okay, well, we got to deal with unions, which means we got to pay them more money. We got to have better benefits for them. If not, they're going to strike. We out of here. So they looked around the world and said, oh, okay, well, we're going to take our factories and take our manufacturing plants elsewhere. And so they moved those factories and moved those plants either to south of the border in places like Mexico or in different places around the world, especially in Asia, Western Asia, Eastern Asia. That's where they moved to. So now if you look at where many of your things come from, they don't come from the United States. They're not made in the US of A. They're made somewhere else. I always encourage people when I have this conversation about globalization and what it means. So the best way I can describe it, I challenge you right now, do a inventory within your own home or your own apartment right at this very moment. Look at where your TV was made. Look at where your furniture was constructed. Look at where your laptop, your cell phone comes from. Look at where your microwave, your refrigerator, your oven, most of the stuff in your home is no longer made within the United States of America. It's made somewhere else. And even the automobiles that we drive, most of the automobiles that we drive are made somewhere else. And even if it has made in the US of A, the parts were made somewhere else, but they were assembled maybe in North or South Carolina or someplace in Western Pennsylvania or someplace in California, but they were just assembled there. So the majority of things, even in your own home today, have not been made by the working class of your nation, because the corporations either are foreign corporations or they're corporations that have origins and histories here within the United States, but they have relocated elsewhere for manufacturing purposes. And not just for the purpose of manufacturing, but most importantly, to to gain a larger profit margin. So rather than make $10 million a year, they want to make $100 million a year. And so they moved somewhere else and left you, their fellow citizen, to just deteriorate. And so now if you look all across this country and you look in cities like Pittsburgh and you look in counties like Allegheny County, and you look at say like the manufacturing base, because Pittsburgh was called Steel City for a reason. If you look at the manufacturing base, the plants that were owned by U.S. Steel, those plants are closed. You still got a few that are open, and U.S. Steel has now been, and I think this is really deep. U.S. Steel is now been purchased or now is being transitioned to being owned by a Japanese steel company, right? But now that's a whole different discussion about how the two nations that you bombed, one you dropped the atom bomb on, the other one you did the whole extensive carpet fire bombing, talking about Germany, and then talking about Japan with the atomic bombs. 70 years later, Germany is the most powerful economy in Europe. And Japan is like one of the top economies in Asia, right? So now, but that's a whole different discussion. That's a whole different session, a whole different class. But again, businesses are not necessarily loyal to the nation state of their origin and will massively unemploy their fellow citizen or workers in order to increase market share and make more money in another region or country. So although neoliberalism is restrictive, conservative, and oppressive when it comes to political economy, it provides a lot of cheap goods like cell phones, computers, sneakers, tennis shoes, and clothing made in other countries by mostly workers of color, African, Asian, and Latino, who are severely exploited by working extremely long hours and sometimes unsafe environments for relatively little pay. Neoliberalism is also noticeably less restrictive regarding cultural and social policy. This is very important to keep in mind because this is the trick. This is the trick bag. So all the other stuff, they exploit you, close the factories, exploit manufacturing, do the whole thing. But this is where you get tricked into thinking that it's okay. Neoliberalism is also noticeably less restrictive regarding cultural/social policy. You can smoke all the weed you want. You can practice whatever religion or non-religion you please. You can self-identify to your heart's desire. You can love anyone you want, marry anyone you want, as long as you don't aspire to overthrow the status quo by dismantling white supremacy and all that comes with it, such as capitalism, misogyny, patriarchy, and imperialism. So with neoliberalism, they don't care. You smoke all the dope, smoke all the weed you want. You want to smoke crack, as long as you get buses, hey, you do that to your heart's desire. That's what neoliberalism does, right? Remember, neo is new, liberalism. So it's like it gives you all these procedural freedoms, process freedom, but not substantive freedom, like the freedom to not starve to death, the freedom to not be homeless, the freedom to not die of illness because of a lack of quality healthcare or the lack of healthcare, period, because you can't afford it. So neoliberalism will let you can get high, You could party all night. You could drink as much as you want. You can marry anybody of any sex, gender, persuasion you want. You can practice any religion that you want. You could do all that under neoliberalism. They don't care. They don't care about that. In contrast to, remember, we talked about the conservative thing. So neoliberalism doesn't care about any of that. But you can't threaten capitalism. You can't threaten imperialism. You can't threaten their right to continue to make money by any means necessary. So that's what neoliberalism at home looks like. Neoliberalism abroad looks eerily the same, no matter which major political party is in office, which means, like for Palestinian people, the bombs being dropped from the planes, whether it's during a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, still bombs. Okay. That's because for the most part, it is the same, whether Bush 1 or Bush 2, Clinton, Obama, or Trump. Neoliberal foreign policy requires and mandates the protection of, and if feasible, the expansion of the United States empire. Basically, continue competition with the likes of Russia, China, financial support and strategic direction for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization or NATO, the United Nations, and the European Union, with or without the United Kingdom, unconditional support for the apartheid nation state of Israel, keeping Black and brown nations in perpetual debt via the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, economic isolation for socialist or independent nation states like Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran, the continued bombing, droning, and occupation of predominantly African and or Muslim people in countries around the world for their natural resources, for example, oil, and geopolitical advantage. For example, the wars in Afghanistan and Syria, the US military presence and expansion throughout Africa, i.e. Afrikan, and the numerous undocumented and unconstitutional, and when I say unconstitutional, they were not approved by the US Congress. Technically, all formally declared wars by the US government have to be approved by Congress. But there have been a whole bunch of undocumented wars and unconstitutional wars, right, and conflicts worldwide. For example, in Yemen, folks in Yemen, South Yemen, the United States has been at war with South Yemen for about the last 10 years. Most of us don't realize this. U.S. planes have been bombing South Yemen for over a decade now. Brothers and sisters down there, very resolute, very tough. They keep fighting back, and they will continue to fight back. I'm gonna get ready to end this. I just want to highlight just a couple of things. We talked about a lot. I know we're going over time, and so that's one of the reasons we're not going to do chapters 2 and 3 today. But I just want to highlight some of the differences, and it kind of goes back to the question that our brother had answered earlier about defining revolution, and by extension, defining revolutionaries. So let's talk about rebels. Rebels are the people who are nonconformists and challenge traditional ways of thinking, behaving, and living. They cause us to question ourselves and the ideas and ideals we so casually embrace and promote. They cause us to question their relevancy and application. Some rebels are extremely anti-authoritarian and reject any notion of authority or accountability that which is created by them. Most adults in US society experience a period of socialization which involves questioning or rebelling against the norms of one's family, religion, or prevailing culture. You know how it is, you're a teenager, you go through that moment where you rebel against your parents' authority. And if you don't out and out rebel, you start to question some of the things that your parents have been teaching you. You start to question some of the things you have learned through perhaps your religious institutions, your church, your masjid, your temple. The majority will transcend this type of rebellion as they mature into adulthood. Now, that doesn't mean that you transcend questioning things. It doesn't mean that you reach an age where you just continue accept everything that you were taught or told by your parents or by your church or your mosque. But it does mean that at some point you start to mature, And even though you continue to have questions, or maybe you've even changed some things in terms of what you believe and so forth and so on, you know, you're starting to settle down a little bit. Because of the impact of white supremacy on our families, neighborhoods, and communities, we have developed a very distinct rebel class engaged in various degrees and types of rebellion, which oftentimes intersect. Socially and economically, many would be labeled as working class, working poor, or low income, although there are indeed many middle class or former middle class participants in this group. Some are creative and are performing artists. Some are straight up criminals and hustlers, only marginally involved with the traditional ways of feeding and supporting themselves. Borrowing from the narratives and writings of Frantz Fanon, the Black Panther Party defines some components of this group as the lumpen proletariat, or lumpen for short. Unemployed, unemployable, formerly incarcerated and convicted, part-time workers, homeless families, homeless veterans, homeless youth. For example, here in Allegheny County is the county which houses Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 40% of the homeless are actually young people who have aged out of foster care, which means they reach the age of 18, 19, 20, so they're no longer eligible to receive the foster care financial support. And shockingly, they get kicked out. They get kicked out by foster care parents. They get kicked out by other relatives, and so they become homeless. And that's a phenomenon here in Allegheny County, but I'm sure that holds true for many other counties across the country. Fast food workers who sell weed or marijuana in between shifts, public school teachers with graduate degrees who actually live in their car, neighborhood drug cartels run by aspiring hip hop artists who use profits to help finance their dreams and pay bills, women and young girls using brains and bodies for survival or being unwilling victims of sex trafficking and exploitation. This is the post-industrial 21st century United States, where the federal minimum wage is still just $7.25 per hour. And countless people are working multiple jobs, engaging in criminal activities and side hustles just to survive, where workers float and transition between being working class and lumpen on a regular basis. So the definitions that we previously used to define or to describe, say, the Black working class or the Black lumpen proletariat are different now, right? Because it's such a transitory type of situation. Again, fast food workers who sell weed, right? It's a little side hustle in between their shifts. They selling weed to make some extra money. Public school teachers, you're a public school teacher, you teaching children, but you living out of your car, right? Neighborhood drug cartels. We all know about our neighborhood drug cartels. If you live in certain cities or certain rural communities, you know, you got some young bucks. They holding it down. They got their little gang. They got their little neighborhood drug cartel. They selling drugs. They trying to make a living. That's their hustle, right? And some of them, you know, they got a little rap skill or they know how to produce something. So they're using that to maybe finance their dream to become the next Jay-Z or 50 Cent or whoever, right? And then we got the young girls and young women who are being exploited, right? And some of them are engaging in this exploitation, not with complete willingness, but out of the need to survive. And some are just being forced into it, right? They're being hijacked, they're being trafficked. And so we got all this stuff going on. And so this is the post-industrial 21st century United States, where the federal minimum wage is still just $7.25 per hour, and countless people are working multiple jobs, engaging in criminal activities and side hustles just to survive, where workers float and transition between being working class and lumpen on a regular basis. These are the rebels. They hustle, commit crimes, reject most established religion, and distrust the system, especially the police. They love their families as well as the neighborhoods, street organizations, or gangs and cliques they represent. They believe in justice, karma, and reciprocity, and share the same basic middle-class dreams and fantasy as most Americans. In other words, even with all the stuff that's going on, they still hold on to this American dream and this fantasy in some shape, form, or fashion. A house, a car, paid vacation, better future for their children. However, throughout the course of urban conflicts, such as rebellions and insurrections, as in the aftermath of the Rodney King verdict of 1992, or the response to the police murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, the rebels, they continue to demonstrate tremendous courage, bravery, and humanity in spite of all their personal and collective flaws. They are acutely in tune with the pulse of neighborhood youth and community sentiment. Particularly in Ferguson, they played a key and crucial role in mobilizing and organizing forces to confront the status quo regarding police murder. Thing that happened with Mike Brown Jr., they actually killed this young man and had his body lie on the concrete in the hot sun and dared the family and friends and community people to try to do anything about it. They kept him at bay. They had him lying in the hot sun for hours, right? And they pushed everybody away. It was the young people who grew up with him, who knew his family, who knew him, and the word spread, and that's how that happened, right? Particularly in Ferguson, they played a key and crucial role in mobilizing and organizing forces to confront the status quo regarding police murder. Unfortunately, career opportunists in the form of professional activists like Black Lives Matter and others from the nonprofit industrial complex would soon converge on Ferguson, misdirect, co-opt, and marginalize the leadership and authenticity of the rebels and establish themselves, Black Lives Matter, etc., as the official spokespersons and representatives of the movement. And we see that happen over and over and over again. Now, let me make something clear about Black Lives Matter. There's a formation called Black Lives Matter grassroots movement. I'm not talking about them. Do some research, do some study. They push back against the traditional Black Lives Matter Foundation because all that money came. They got offered $100 million. I'm talking about Black Lives Matter Foundation, the international foundation. They got offered $100 million by, I think it was the Ford Foundation. And I think they rejected that, but eventually they were able to accumulate a total of about $100 million from other foundations. And they just went berserk in terms of how they mismanaged funds, how their politics were watered down. It just became something else, right? But there's another group that emerged from that struggle because it was an internal struggle about all of that. And it was some people who wanted to be true to the founding principles and the mission, and they started something called Black Lives Matter Grassroots. And I think they're based in California, in Los Angeles. Look for Sister Dr. Melina Abdullah and some of the people that she works with.
What's the name of this Black Lives Matter in New York? Where
I don't know about Black Lives. I don't know the name of the Black Lives Matter group in New York, but I know that there's several chapters of Black Lives Matter Grassroots. New York may have a chapter there as well. I know there's chapters in California, chapters in some other places around the country. But you could do your own research into that. But I just want to make that distinction between the group Black Lives Matter Grassroots versus the Black Lives Matter movement and the foundation and the more dominant group today that's in charge of all the money and the resources. They are thoroughly corrupt. And do your own research. Don't take my word for it. And you can draw your own conclusion. So the issue with now this is my critique of the rebel class. So listen close. The issue with the rebel class is that those involved in street crime and hustling have developed predatory gangster mentalities and lifestyles that don't serve the long-term collective best interests of Black or New African people. It contributes to serious damage to the Black family and Black social fabric. Their rejection of traditional American values and behaviors and their militant opposition to police violence should not be misinterpreted as wholesale support or endorsement for radical or revolutionary change. Much personal transformation and political education needs to take place beforehand. Prisons are full of Black and New African rebels, but the vast majorities have not developed into radicals or revolutionaries such as Malcolm X or George Jackson. So that's what I like to say about the rebel class. Besides the predatory behavior of certain elements within the rebel class, they have a tendency to be undisciplined, overly materialistic, and obsessed with social image over social substance, all of which makes them right. And please pay very close attention to what I'm saying, because this could be an indicator of some of the challenges we will have to face as a Black liberation movement in the future. All of which makes them ripe and primary candidates for recruitment by the counter-revolutionary forces of the state as informants and agent provocateurs via operations such as COINTELPRO and the recently disclosed FBI Black Identity Extremists Initiative. It also makes them extremely vulnerable to the manipulations, co-optation, and exploitation by the professional organizers of the nonprofit industrial complex, as well as the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And so we got to be careful with the rebel class. Brothers, sisters, courageous, the whole hookup, but they could be co-opted, they could be manipulated, they could be brought off, especially those who, they keep glorifying the whole materialistic thing, right? Their street credibility and reputation are often used by these representatives of white supremacy, such as the nonprofit industrial complex, the liberals, the so-called progressives, and politicians to maintain control over the hearts and minds of the Black New African community, particularly our youth. So we get guys, formerly incarcerated men and women who come out of prison, they want to do the right thing, but they find themselves being manipulated. They find themselves being, and oftentimes it's unconscious. They find themselves being manipulated by elements from the Democratic Party establishment, using the nonprofit industrial complex. And so these brothers and sisters are trying to do good within their communities. Perhaps they've changed their lives. And so they're not gangbanging, they ain't selling drugs, they ain't doing a whole bunch of criminal stuff that they used to. But now they're being manipulated and used through the nonprofit industrial complex to spread a certain type of message. And the message that they're being used to spread is no to radicalism, no to any revolution, no to any change in a political structure. Just follow the Democratic Party. Keep being a good boy, keep being a good girl, right? And keep hope alive. Like, look at me. I used to be a gang member. I used to hustle. If I can do it, you can do it too. The system can work. We just have to try harder. So those are some of the pitfalls with the rebel class, right? Again, their street credibility and reputation are often used by these representatives of white supremacy, such as elements within the nonprofit industrial complex, liberals, so-called progressives, and especially politicians to maintain control over the hearts and minds of the Black New African community, particularly our youth, right? This is accomplished by promoting either passivity, nonviolence, feeble responses to injustice, like stage marches, rallies, prayer circles, doves, releasing balloons, and music concerts, and or continued faith in the system's ability to correct itself by convening hearings, commissions, or proposing legislation. So, they're being used to promote a certain way of dealing with injustice. And that way that they're being used to promote doesn't lead to justice. It just leads to the system continuing to be able to do what it does. Now, I'm not saying that, these brothers and sisters have ill intent. 99.9% don't, but they're being used and they're being, manipulated. And I'm not saying that there's no value in some of the work that they do, because there is a lot of value. All concerts, all prayer circles, all marches and rallies are not bad. They're not negative. Do they have value? Yes, they do. But we got to look at what is the intent, what is the purpose, what is the desired outcome. That's how we need to look at this stuff. Just don't look at the act itself. Just don't deal with the performative act. Look at where it comes from and look at the intent behind it and look at the impact, right, behind it. And so we need to, be mindful of these type of tricks that people have up their sleeves, especially to control the hearts and minds of our young people. Keep our young people bobbing their head, keep them calling each other out of their name, right? And keep our young people engaged in self-destructive behavior, not any type of behavior or any type of politic that's going to raise their consciousness and cause them to challenge the systems of white supremacy and economic injustice and exploitation. Reminds one of how during the urban riots / rebellions of the 1960s, the white man would call upon the Black church ministers and Black celebrities to go throughout the ghetto and encourage Black youth to be cool. I remember that because I was one of them youth, and I remember that's exactly what they would do, right? They would call upon your minister or some well-known minister in the area and call upon the local celebrities to, walk up and down the street telling us to be cool, don't do this, everything's going to be all right, blah, 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 blah. Nevertheless, rebels are full of potential for genuine personal transformation and positive impact on new African Black communities. I know of many formerly incarcerated people and former gang members who are dedicated to improving the lives of Black people and others. For some, the transformation has been both radical and revolutionary. We have elements within our communities that understand the necessity of thorough and complete systemic change in order for new African and Black people to be truly free. They are dedicated and committed people who clearly recognize the root causes of our people's oppression and demand its eradication as a necessity for our freedom and self-group determination. However, they often perceive victory and liberation as the culmination of a series of events instead of a process. These are the radicals. They want revolutionary change today, this very minute, and believe it is just around the corner. So, when we define radical, we're not talking about radical in its purest sense, because radical means to get to the root of something. We're talking about radical within a context of someone who wants to get to the root of something right away, right? Who may not understand that it's a process. And so most radicals would transition from taking a radical approach to a more revolutionary approach. Because the revolutionary approach is also, in essence, it's an evolutionary approach. Because revolution, as we all know, is not just a singular event or thing, it's a process. And processes involve what? They involve time and commitment and so forth and so on. So the radicals, they echo the philosophy of, quote unquote, if all Black people would just, and so they usually say, if all Black people would just, and here's the list, it's not exhaustive, but if all Black people would just come together, if all Black people would stop voting, or if all Black people would arm themselves and fight back, if all Black people would vote in every election, if all Black people would support Black businesses, if all Black people would attend the next big march, if all Black people would just do for self, if all Black people would read more, if all Black people would follow a specific leader, and I mean, the list can go on. Some people say, if all Black people just become vegetarians, if all Black people stop eating pork. So, they seek immediate and permanent, I can't see the rest of it, from white supremacy and economic injustice, such as capitalism, imperialism, self, and group hatred.
Okay, excuse me, brother.
Yeah.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Can I ask you, what if you was to say the same thing for all Black people to do, or what would be the solution that's not on that list? What would it be?
Okay. Now, if you could say that again, you could ask your question again. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay, so you got this list of what people always say, if all Black people do this or do that, right?
Mhm.
If there was something that all Black people could do that would actually lead to us being liberated, and what would you say that one thing would be, or that thing would be that would be the solution to our problem or to our liberation?
I wouldn't say that because I don't believe that.
So there's no one thing that all
No,
people, black people can do.
No,
Okay.
no, brother. There's no singular, like, at least this is what I believe. I don't believe there's a magic bullet. I don't believe there's a magic bullet. So if all black people, if all black people became Christian, no. If all black people became Muslim, no. If all black people embrace an indigenous African faith, no, no. If all black people supported all black businesses, no. I mean, and so I could give you the rebuttal to each one. So there is no singular magic bullet. This is not, this ain't March 22nd, 1963. There ain't no magic bullet, right? Our problems are multi-generational and multi-layered and very nuanced. And our path to freedom and liberation is going to be very nuanced and multi-layered. Now, if you would have asked me if we were able to attain our freedom and liberation, what might be some of the first steps that I would recommend? I could tell you those steps that I would recommend. But in terms of, is there a step, a magic bullet that's going to free us or liberate it? No, no. Think about the nationalism of Malcolm X in his early years. I like to call it, I don't, I don't think it was reactionary Black nationalism, but I like to call it fundamental Black nationalism, right? And actually, I think there's another word I've used for it, like in some of my writings. But Malcolm X, his fundamental Black nationalism that he had developed through his membership with the Nation of Islam identified all white people as being the devil. And his fundamental Black nationalism, as it was expanded, as he grew more into the Nation of Islam, became almost like a Muslim nationalism as well, which said that if all Black people became Muslim, and not just if all Black people became any type of Muslim, but if all Black people joined the Nation of Islam, then we would be free, right? But, I mean, so and then Malcolm outgrew that because he came to realize that that was not true, that was not the solution. And so he grew from a fundamental Black nationalism, developed into a Muslim nationalism, and then he was able to embrace more of a broad-based Black nationalism, right? And then he was even able, as he traveled more and met with more people in New York and outside of New York, he was able to develop more of a Pan-Africanist perspective. And then he grew beyond that. He was able to connect the dots, not just amongst the Black folks in New York and Mississippi, but he was able to connect the dots between the Black folks in New York, Mississippi, and throughout the African diaspora, and then connect those dots to the people of color and even non-people of color who were being oppressed and exploited in Central, South America, Western Asia, Southeast Asia, and different parts of Europe, right? So he was able to become an international. So he went from fundamental Black nationalism, Muslim nationalism, revolutionary Black nationalism, because he gave a nod to socialism as well. And then he was able to embrace Pan-Africanism, and then he was able to become an internationalist. And none of those required the negation of the former. So he continued to be a Black nationalist. He continued to advocate on behalf of Muslims and Islam, and he continued to encourage people to become Muslim. At first, it was through the Nation of Islam, and later it was through Muslim Mosque Incorporated. So he continued to do that. He continued to embrace Pan-Africanism and advocate on behalf of all of us on the continent and throughout the African diaspora. And then he grew and he continued to advocate on behalf of all oppressed people. When he made his statements and he made his declarations about he would work with anybody who was against the system, who wanted to change the system, who wanted to overthrow the system. And he defined the system as white supremacy, racism, capitalism, and imperialism. And he gave contemporary examples during his time. He talked about the heroic struggles of the Vietnamese people. He talked about the struggles in places like Cuba. He talked about the struggles of the Black folks in the South, and he connected those struggles to the Black folks throughout the African continent. So one did not require the negation of the other, right? At least in most cases, right? Um, the Black nationalism that was rooted in this idea of Black, all white people being devils, he had to negate that, but he still maintained his Black nationalist identity. And then he was able to add to it, add to it, add to it, add to it some more. And I hope I'm answering your question, brother.
Well, you answered that question. But in the process, I still want you to elaborate on those 3 steps that you think, or 3 or 4 steps you said that you would articulate. But before that, I want to mention something because you talk about Malcolm X and talking about evolving on his thing about white folks being the devils and all that. And in my studies,
I can't hear you right now, so you're going to have to repeat what you said. The last thing I heard, you made reference to your studies. So if you could pick it up from there.
in the Black movement.
Okay.
But then
The
he
last,
also put the cover.
the
He
last
also
thing,
put the
let
cover.
me, let me,
Go
let me
ahead.
finish, brother. The last thing I heard you say was in your studies. Everything else, it didn't come through. So if you could repeat it.
Okay, in my study, he adjusted his position. I first said that they didn't have no role, and all of them was just black, white devils, right? He adjusted it saying that they had a role, but they had to be like John Brown. And then he said for them not to join black organizations, but to form their own organizations and fight against white supremacy among their own people. If they were, and that was the role that they had. And he cautioned about us allowing them into organizations and and it causes distrust and things of that nature, huh?
Well,
Just to start, just to,
yeah, I think you're adding a little bit to it, my brother. Um, I don't think he said all that. But now I will agree with this. He did come to the realization that whites would be better served working within their families and their own neighborhoods and their own communities, encouraging other whites to not embrace white supremacy, to reject it, and to not be racist. I agree. He also was willing to work with anyone who was willing to work with him, right? And he also was able to come to the conclusion that it was more of a struggle, not just a struggle for Black freedom and Black liberation, but it was a struggle for people's freedom and people's liberation, because there was an international, worldwide system that had everybody by the throat. So that's what I mean about him becoming an internationalist at some point.
you misunderstanding me.
I'm only repeating what you said.
I didn't say when I said that he said for white folks to work in their own organizations among their own people and not to join our organizations. That don't mean that he said that he wouldn't work with them. It means that he would work with them on a group basis or like 2 different nations working with each other through their their own autonomy, huh? Not that he would just not work with them, but maintain separate groups and separate autonomy. Like, for example, you got NATO, a whole bunch of different nations in NATO, but they all have their own autonomy to a certain extent. So just to give an example, huh? Not that's not a good example, but
No, it's not a good example because United States of
black
America
folks.
controls NATO. But go ahead.
Well,
I mean, I
well,
understand what you're saying. I
let's say for
understand what you're
example,
saying. I understand what you're saying, brother.
say
Look,
for
if
example, you
I
got some groups that want to fight against racism, anti-racist white groups, right? You got a anti-racist white group, yeah. Then, well, you might want to form a pact with my group, with the Black Panther Party or something. We can do that, but you're not going to join my organization, and you're not going to be but we can go engage in joint operations
sure, no
and
problem at
coalition
all.
work. And
Sure,
that's the
no
sense
problem at all.
that's the sense what I get from what I read Malcolm X to speak in the
Okay, well, listen, you might
different
be
right to that
correct.
particular
You might
topic
be
of
correct. Yeah, you might be correct. Okay, so what's the other point, though? Again, I'm saying there is no singular bully. There's no
Well, the only
there's no
point was I
magic
want
bullet.
you to explain your three steps that you said that would be since you said there was no magic bullet, then what would be the three steps you said would be the starting phase
Well, what I
towards
mentioned, yeah,
liberating, huh?
yeah, what I mentioned is that if we were to achieve freedom and liberation, and if someone were to ask me what might be the first three things that I would want to initiate or recommend, then I've given that considerable thought. But yeah, so there's a few things that I would want to initiate, but we're not there yet. We're far from that point. We're far from there. Brother Arnold, you had your hand up. You want to make a statement?
Yes, I wanted to tell Brother Melvin that out of the '60s, there were some of the more radical white groups, like the Weather Underground, and they, and other radical white groups. They didn't necessarily, follow Malcolm X. They did their own thing. They were against the Vietnam War and they were against the imperialism. These people were really more radical than some of the black radical groups.
Okay. All right. Any other comments before we moved on? All right. So I just want to repeat this part. One of the characteristics of an undeveloped radical is the tendency to lose faith in the movement, lose his or her self-confidence, and give in to hopelessness and despair. Once again, we must emphasize the importance of political education and organizational development in the pursuit of Black freedom and self-group determination. Revolutionary struggle and victory is a process, not a singular or series of events. Again, there is no magic bullet. Those within the Black or New African community who desire to advocate for a comprehensive change in the conditions of our lives and who work to challenge, overthrow, and remove the existing white supremacist yoke of oppression from the throats of Black people are revolutionaries. Going back to answer a question that had been asked some time back during this presentation. They demand freedom and power and clearly understand that Black people can't really have one without the other. Revolutionaries are not just against racism, but are anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist as well. And just like the national Black/New African community, the Black revolutionary class is not monolithic in its political perspectives and ideologies. We continue to wage ideological struggle concerning misogyny, patriarchy, feminism, and the role of LGBTQ issues within the broader context of the movement. We also have conflicting visions for what this new society should look like, as well as strategic and tactical disagreements on how best to get there. However, the Black revolutionary class is firmly committed to the dismantling and destruction of white supremacy. Hence, Black revolutionaries don't belong to either of the mainstream political parties. Let me say that again. Black revolutionaries don't belong to either of the mainstream political parties. Black revolutionaries are not Democrats. Black revolutionaries are not Republicans. They are not members of any political party which supports and defends capitalist exploitation at home and imperialism and militarism throughout the world. The Black revolutionary class falls along the ideological spectrum of Black nationalism, Pan-Africanism, socialism, communism, feminism, womanism, environmentalism, internationalism, and anarchism, and various religious, spiritual, and cultural tendencies. The Black revolutionary class is composed of Black radical and revolutionary activists who are engaged in multiple or specific areas of movement building and struggle, such as education, creative and performing arts, housing, criminal justice, political prisoners, electoral politics, economic development, labor organizing, self and group defense, etc. They read, study, observe, organize, and teach. They are strategic and combine theory with practice. There is general agreement throughout the national Black or New African community as to what constitutes some of the more serious challenges facing it, especially among working class and low income members. For example, racism, unemployment, homelessness, education, mass incarceration, poverty, police violence, gentrification, voter suppression, community violence. There is also general agreement regarding the impacts these conditions have had on the quality of our life. We get race-based income and wealth disparities, educational gaps. We get health-wise, we get hypertension, high blood pressure, substance abuse, mental health problems, broken families, vulnerable neighborhoods and communities around issues such as public safety, food and water security, and gentrification. So I'm gonna start to go quickly through a lot of this stuff because time is of the essence here. Some people may not yet have developed a perspective as to what they are actually fighting for.
Oh, you want big eyes?
Yeah, like if you could hit me on that.
I need somebody to put themselves on mute in the background. Thank you. Are we fighting for civil rights or human rights? Maybe a continuum which involves some of both. Many have come to identify Donald Trump and his presidency as their center of focus and organized resistance. So what happens if Trump and his administration are removed through impeachment or he loses his presidential bid for re-election? Is that the victory we've all been fighting for? Have the structures, the institutions, and systems, the power of white supremacy and economic injustice been dismantled? Donald Trump is not an aberration or distortion of race, class, and gender relations in America. He is just a representative of another version. So I'm gonna skip through some things here. We need to ask ourselves, for example, as Black and New African people involved in all sorts of activism, ranging from anti-police brutality to environmental justice to routine survival, the question remains, what are we fighting for? What is our agenda? And what is the end game? In conclusion, we know that people can be awoke and conscious and not necessarily be an activist. We know that there are all types of activists who focus on concentrate their passion, skills, and energies in multiple areas of movement building and struggle. We realize that among Black or New African activists, that not all activism is radical nor revolutionary in purpose or intent. Much of today's activism is actually reformist and is not intended to create a fundamentally different society, which liberates and empowers Black people. It is only intended to correct the most blatant expressions of injustice while maintaining the continued racial and economic oppression and exploitation of the national Black or New African community. We know that liberals, neoliberals, and progressives within the nonprofit industrial complex work in collusion with mostly Democratic Party operatives to control the narrative and movement building activities among disgruntled members of the Black community, especially the youth. We know that those who are mostly living on the edge as chronically unemployed, underemployed, homeless, currently or formerly incarcerated, the hustlers, the gang members, and petty criminals constitute what the Black Panther Party via Frantz Fanon described as the lumpen, or those we define as rebels. The rebel class has some admirable qualities, but many counter-revolutionary tendencies and challenges that must be addressed. We now know that the real revolutionaries are not members of any political party, which is grounded, rooted in, or supports white supremacy and economic injustice, whether at home or abroad. So real revolutionaries, you ain't members of the Democratic Party. I don't care how you try to frame it, disguise it, or present it. Real revolutionaries, you ain't members of the moderate wing of the Republican Party either. I don't care how you try to frame it, disguise it, or put it out there, right? We know that revolutionaries engage in some type of scientific process that is study, research, action, evaluation. They try to be strategic, not reactionary. They understand that revolution is a process and not an event. They constantly struggle in sustaining and maintaining a lifelong commitment. The Black revolutionary class is not monolithic and comprises people of differing ideological perspectives. They also represent numerous religious.
Free the land.
Free the land. Yes, go ahead.
Let me interrupt you. Earlier you said there was, and you said coming back at it again, about there was a lot of different strategies, and now you're dealing with the Black revolutionary class. And my question earlier particularly was dealing with revolutionary and what's not revolutionary. And you actually said earlier about the difference between one of the other brothers mentioned something about being truthful as opposed to being false stuff. Okay, so, and then you said that there was a lot of different strategies a lot of brothers and revolutionaries are following. So if we take the position that looking at the crest theory of race and color and looking at informed by Chancellor Williams under teaching on race, and we take that where she talk about the white supremacy, racism, the dominant operate, right? And then we take that and we say, well, the true revolutionary is the one that wants to dismantle this system of white supremacy. So that means that how many different strategies are there that can dismantle that system? And if there's only one strategy on earth that can dismantle that system, if everybody else is following a different strategy, that means technically they're not revolutionary. That the only ones that are revolutionary is the ones following that one strategy dismantle revolution. I mean,
Okay,
white
okay.
supremacy.
So listen. Let me quickly push back against that. First of all, you're using the word strategy, right? And what you're doing, you're conflicting the word, or you're conflating the word strategy to be strategic with one's perspective, and they're not the same thing, brother. So again, I made it clear that
Well, the one I'm pushing is this: if there's only one strategy,
there's not
they
one
can
strategy. There's not one strategy.
dismantle.
No, there's
And,
not. No. Listen, there's never ever been one strategy. Ever. There's not one strategy, right?
well, I'm not saying that there is. I'm
Oh,
using a
okay.
hypothetical. I'm
Oh,
saying if
okay.
the hypothetical is that there is only one strategy that can dismantle white supremacy racism, then if that is the true predicate, then that means that everybody following all the other different strategies will be following illusions and not in actuality to be revolutionary.
Yeah. Well, again, that's quite a bit of an
But
hypothesis.
then the reason
And
I put that
and
on the table, is because Dr. Francis West Westman defined white supremacy as the dominant operating system in the world. And so therefore, there got to be the strategy has to be to destroy and dismantle that one dominant system.
that's not a strategy.
So,
That's not a
huh?
strategy, brother. That's an intent. That's a goal. It could be an objective, but it's not a
well,
strategy.
well,
It's
well,
not a
well,
straight.
well, with
No.
you to
Listen,
dismantle that one system.
brother. Free the land. Step back for a minute. Step back. It's not a strategy. It's not a strategy. That's not a strategy. That could be a purpose. That could be intent. If you want to give it a more broader definition, it could be an objective. At some point, it could even be a tactic. It could be tactical, but it's not a strategy. Okay, I'm gonna finish wrapping this up, and then we can come back to your concern. So I'm gonna repeat this part again. We know that real Black revolutionaries are not members of any political party which is grounded, rooted in, or supports white supremacy and economic injustice, whether at home or abroad. That means you're going to be anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. We know that radical thinking, analysis, and action is a key component to becoming revolutionary. I'm gonna skip this part here and go to the next section. The Black revolutionary class is not monolithic and comprises people of differing ideological perspectives. So again, you're conflating perspectives with strategy. They also represent numerous religious, spiritual, and cultural tendencies and varying degrees of experience. Some people are new to the movement, some people are veterans to the movement. We realize that both mainstream political parties, Democrats and Republicans, actually represent competing segments within the ruling class of the United States. Neither party represents the collective best interests of the new African or Black people, especially those who are working class and low income. We realize that the Trump presidency, whether it's the first presidency or it's the one now, I'm putting that in there. We realize that the Trump presidency and White House is an enemy. But listen to this closely. It is an enemy, but not the enemy. Because Trump could leave the White House tomorrow morning. The MAGA movement would still be around. And if the MAGA movement itself, through its internal conflict and contradiction, was to self-implode, we would still have to deal with the realities of what? White supremacy, racism, capitalism, imperialism. All that stuff would still be there. The institutions, structures, and systems would still be around. So we can't like focus just on an individual or the movement that has evolved around this individual. We got to deal with the systems, the structures, and the institutions. Hopefully, the definitions listed above will provoke some discussion, and it has. So I'm gonna get back to my brother's points and his critique. Hopefully, the definitions listed above will provoke some discussion and debate among various groups and cadre. We hope such exchanges will improve our overall strategic understandings and sharpen our daily practice. So I'm gonna stop there, brother. The floor is yours. You can reintroduce your argument or your position.
Well, I was just going based on the if we start with the premises that one system, and it's global, and it's the dominant operating system in the world. And then we take that and we say, well, we're going to define revolutionary as somebody who is working on intent to dismantle that system. Then, by logical extension, there must be a strategy to dismantle that one system. And I'm a Muslim, and I think you're a Muslim. And we know in the Quran it say, outside of truth, there's nothing but falsehood or illusion. So that means if we take that this is one dominant system, and that there must be a strategy to dismantle it, if there's only one strategy on earth that can dismantle that system, then that means that everybody following all the other strategies are following illusions, huh? No. And that they're not truly revolutionary because it's only one revolutionary strategy. Now, if there's more, that's a question. It presents a different matter. But my position is if there's only one strategy, I yield.
Okay, so let me respond again. I think you're conflating perspective with strategy. In volume 2 of Toward a New African Revolution, when we get to volume 2 at some point, I'm gonna go over the different. Matter of fact, you know what I'm gonna do? Hold up for 1 second, brother. Because again, I think you're conflating strategy with perspective, and those are not the same thing. And people oftentimes do that, right? Like your perspective becomes your strategic approach to dealing with a problem, but your perspective may not inform your strategy. Or in most cases, your perspective should inform your strategy, but it may not, right? And so if you're dealing with, 45 to 50 million Black people, multiple groups of organizations, we're going to have various perspectives, right? And so our job, our duty is to look at the various perspectives.
Let me be more clear, brother.
Let me finish. Like grind some things out and then figure out what might be the better strategies or the better approaches. And check this out. The strategies themselves may have to change. And then tactically, we're going to have to make some changes and adapt to some things. But go ahead. You say you're going to make yourself clear. I'm listening.
Yes, I'm saying that if there's this one strategy, that this is the one strategy that all Black people or a critical mass of them worldwide must actually follow and implement in order to achieve dismantle white supremacy racism. That's what I mean. A critical mass of all Black people globally must actually concertedly implement this strategy, a critical mass.
Okay.
And if they don't, that would be dismantled. Okay. That's what I mean by strategy.
Okay. There is no one strategy. So let me say that. So let's clear that up. So if that's your premise itself is not sound. There is no one singular strategy, even when you talk about critical mass. So, I've had conversations with some other people. So for me, within the United States of America, again, 45 to 50 million Black folks, right? Critical mass might be 10%. Critical mass for us might be, 4.5 to 5 million Black people. move in a certain direction. Well, that's critical mass. Now, strategically, we still got some other things you're going to have to work on. Tactically, we have a whole bunch of things we need to work on, right? So again, people confuse or they conflate strategy with perspective. I'm gonna go over something very quick, and this is actually from volume 2, because volume 2 is more recent. You know, recent. I think I wrote volume 2 in 2022. Yeah, I wrote it in 2022, and so it's not as dated as the volume that we're going over. But quickly, I'm gonna talk about this, and I've had this discussion, and I've laid this out with some other groups and organizations in the past, right? Because we were walking in circles, and we were, you know, talking about stuff like everything was the same. So I'm gonna run this real quick. And this is taken from chapter 8 of volume 2, political tendencies within the Black community. Although there are various political ideologies, such as liberalism, conservatism, nationalism, Pan-Africanism, Marxism, feminism, etc., among the members of the national Black or New African community, there are indeed a select number of political tendencies. By political tendency, what I'm referring to is how we organize, manage, and distribute our power in response to the oppression inflicted upon us. The three most popular political tendencies are integration, accommodation, and or separation, right? So ideology is one thing, tendency is another thing. Look at it this way. What you might believe in, what your philosophy might be, but what you actually do. So, you know, we have Black people who believe in Black nationalism, they believe in Pan-Africanism. Some might be Marxists, some might be feminists, but their political tendency, their behavior, their actions might fall in line with integration, might fall in line with accommodation. Some instances might fall in line with separation, right? And I'm going to stop there, but I'm just going to, no. Let me say this last part. We need to be clear about our tendency, our political tendency, right? And, you know, where we are in terms of what we might believe in, right? So again, political tendency I'm referring is to how we organize, manage, and distribute our power in response to the oppression, right? Not our ideology, but our political tendency. So I'm gonna stop there because I wanna get to volume 2 when it's time for us to get to volume 2 and not before. Right now we're going through volume 1, and I think this is some great discussion and feedback. I just want to say this to you, brother. There is no one strategy. And you know, so let me be clear about something. So, you know, I talked about Malcolm's political development and his political growth. Just say, for example, when he was focusing and he was in the realm of Black nationalism / Muslim nationalism. And that's what the Nation of Islam taught, and that's what the Nation of Islam promoted. I'm not talking about the ideological component or, yeah, like the ideological component about white people being devils. Let's ignore that. Let's just talk about the Black nationalism / Muslim nationalism component. Black nationalism at that point for the Nation of Islam being defined as all Black people should come together. We can do this, da 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 da. The Muslim nationalism component being all Black people, if you would just become Muslim and not just any type of Muslim, if you join the Nation of Islam, you could be free. You could have heaven on earth. All right, look. So if all Black people became Muslim tomorrow morning, guess what? We still be oppressed and exploited, and we would still be a highly racialized. Now we would just be Muslim, but we still be a highly racialized, marginalized internal colony within the United States of America. Because tomorrow morning, the only change would have been that we all would be Muslim. We all would be saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. If we all became Christian tomorrow morning, the only difference would be we all would affirm that we believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, right? If we embrace a traditional African faith tomorrow morning, all of us, whatever African faith best suited us, The only change would be we would all now believe in traditional African gods and goddesses and so forth and so on. That would be it. That would be it. Nothing else would have fundamentally changed. Okay, so in order for this change to happen, there is no magic bullet. It's not just becoming Muslim or Christian or becoming Yoruba. It's not just changing from a suit jacket to a dashiki. It's going to require some serious struggle, internal and a lot of external struggle, right? There's no magic bullet. There's no one way. And when I say,
Can you give me some examples of what serious type of change you say got to happen?
No. No, I'm not going to share with you some of the things I think we would probably need to happen after we were actually free and liberated. There's certain things that as a
I'm
free
talking about
nation,
in order to get free. I'm talking about some things that actually have to happen
I think
to get free.
Yeah, I think we're doing that right now. I think political education classes, community organizing classes, I think this is very important because it can help us to clear up some of the misunderstandings amongst and between ourselves. But I think it can help us to clear up a lot of the misconceptions about who we are, who our friends, and who our enemies and adversaries are. A lot of us are going around here, we call ourselves radicals and revolutionaries, and we don't even know who our enemies are. We think people who are our enemies are actually our friends, right? And they're not. And we think that they're our friends because we haven't been educated properly, right? We get misled, we get duped easily, right? People throw up Black Fist, they throw up photos of Malcolm, they quote Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and they show the Panther, and we think what they represent is really revolutionary. And in essence, it's not. And it just leads us through the back door of re-entering what? The Democratic Party. In many cases, sometimes the Republican Party, but in most cases, the Democratic Party establishment and their politics, which is a politics that supports neo-colonialism. New, we know what colonialism is. Neo-colonialism. Colonialism that masquerades itself as freedom. Colonialism that looks like you, but it's still your enemy. Colonialism that quotes the 10-point platform and program of the Black Panther Party. Colonialism that celebrates Juneteenth. Colonialism that celebrates Kwanzaa. Neo-colonialism looks like you, talks like you, walks like you, still keeps you colonized. Neo-colonialism. And so many of us don't even understand that yet. We haven't come to grips with that type of dynamic, right? So education is key. Education is fundamental. You know, a lot of people want to quote the Black Panther Party and they want to, blow up the Black Panther Party, right? But in the Black Panther Party, man, when you walked in the door, did nobody give you no gun, right? People gave you a book. And if you didn't know how to read, somebody assigned you somebody could help you to learn how to read because you had to be educated. And not a formal education, not getting a bachelor's degree or some type of degree from a college or university, but you had to come to understand what the organization represented, what the platform was about, and you had to come to understand something about yourself. Why does your neighborhood look different than the other neighborhoods? And how did that come to be? Right? So you had to get down to the nitty gritty. What we're doing now is revolutionary. What we're doing now is preparing people, right, to be able to think for themselves and to be able to make decisions for themselves and to not be confused in spite of all the images that comes through mass media and social media. This is revolutionary, what we're doing right now. So if you want to know one of the things that's needed to make a successful revolution is political education. Any other questions or comments before we close out for the day? And I apologize, we're running over.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, Brother Khalid, would you compare so-called Antifa to the Yippies or the Students for Democratic Society or Weather Underground?
I don't want to draw those comparisons. I think it's unfair. So, yeah.
I'd like to know what I mean, this idiot he always refers to Antifa. I like to know what exactly is Antifa.
Well, I can't define that for you. I mean, I have some ideas about it, but again, I think my descriptions would be lacking and it would be unfair. I would encourage you all to do your own research. Go online, go to the library, do your own research into what Antifa is and what Antifa isn't. Any other questions or comments as we close out for the day?
Asante Sana, my brother, for the political education. I really appreciate it. I support you wholeheartedly. I'm gonna be talking to you about getting some of your books. Do you have some of your books in your possession now? And
Yeah,
what's
I
the
do.
cost of the book?
Yeah, I do have a few. Well, you and I can talk about that later on. You could go online.
Okay, my
You can
brother.
order them through Amazon if you want to do. If you don't want to do Amazon, there's a black bookseller you can go to, and I put that information in the chat. So if you go to the chat, you should be able to see it. I'm gonna stop. Go ahead,
I
brother. I'm
got
sorry.
it. I got it.
Okay.
I got it, brother. And I'll be getting the book shortly. I'd
Okay.
rather get it from you than get it from Amazon or any of them online distributors.
Oh yeah, sure.
Peace,
Sure.
my brother. Much
Hey,
love
brother,
to
thank
you.
you. Oh, likewise. And I really appreciate everyone. Listen, before everybody leaves, are there any more questions or comments? Right before we leave for the evening, or before we leave for the afternoon.
Yes. I want to know. Do you hear any information on the Black Radical Convention? As far as getting a hotel or anything like that.
Yeah. So for those who want to attend the National Black Radical Political Convention, it's scheduled in Philadelphia at Temple University, October the 25th and the 26th of this year. If you go to the registration page, there's some information there. And as a matter of fact, if you go to the website or you go to the registration page, there's some information there about the 2 hotels that we have reserved so far. Just use the code NBRPC. I can put that information in the chat very quickly. Just give me a moment. All right, let me see. So I just put some information, the save the date page from the National Black Radical Political Congress's website. And let's see, I can get this other stuff here. So if you go to that website, scroll down to where it says early registration ends on August the 23rd. Click that, it should take you to the registration page. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. Okay, so I put the other link in the chat as well for those who may be interested. And I want to encourage people, to attend, to participate, be an opportunity for us to see each other, network. Again, our party, New African Independence Party, we are part of a national Black political coalition, a radical Black political coalition, which is called the National Black Radical Political Congress. And so this will be our 4th convention. We had a convention in Philadelphia, one in Baltimore, one online, and now for the 4th year, we're going to be in Philadelphia at Temple University. So if you can attend, really, really appreciate it. And you're also welcome to join the Congress as well. So we're a membership-based organization. We're comprised of individuals as well as other organizations. So we have individual membership, membership geared for senior members of our community, as well as the youth and students, and organizational membership. Our organizational members are Ujima People's Progress Party, based out of Maryland, Operation Power, based out of New York, the National Black United Front, which is national, and the local organizing committee, based out of Mississippi, and our party, the New African Independence Party, based out of Pittsburgh, with members all around the country. Any other questions or comments before we close for the day?
Thanks for that information, Brother Khalid.
Oh, okay. Okay, y'all. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you, taking from your day and taking from your time to participate in the class. And special shout out to Brother Jami Lukman, and my brother Hanif, Marvin Parker. So we can always talk at some other point. All power to the people, free the land, and free all political prisoners.
All power to the people, free the land, free all political prisoners.
All
By any
power to the
means
people,
necessary.
free the land.